Hail hail and welcome to part 10 of the Celtic History podcast series, which charts the history of Celtic Football Club from 1887 to the current day. In part 9 of the series, titled A Great Party with a Terrible Hangover, Chris was joined by author Douglas Beattie, and they covered the period from 1980 to 1990. The decade begins with a Scottish Cup final that is remembered for all of the wrong reasons. There are more adventures in Europe, with defining matches against Real Madrid, Ajax, and of course, Rapid Vienna. This time also sees the rise in power of a new firm from the east of Scotland, as Celtic face the challenges of Dundee United and Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen. The Bhoys detail a number of player transfers, including the most controversial in Scottish football history. There are more changes in the manager's position, with Billy McNeill firstly leaving the club, only to rejoin and lead it to the double in its centenary year. We hear eyewitness accounts from players of this era, including George McCluskey, Anton Rogan, and Frank McAvenny, as well as a history of the Celtic view. There are details of the playing kit worn in the 1980s, history of the stadium, all mixed with more fan stories and confessions.
But it was a magical thing to go at the beginning of the 80s. There were a few lows and a lot of changes. The new firm have come and they've gone, but goodness me, they made the 80s all the more intriguing.
In Europe, the Bhoys had progressed to the quarter-finals of the European Cup.
The 3-0 loss in Madrid really kicked their confidence in.
George McCluskey's extra-time goal proved to be the winner in a 1-0 final victory over Rangers.
The riot that followed the Scottish Cup final of 1980 and saw alcohol banned from football matches in Scotland.
Brilliantly talented player like Charlie Nicholas. He could have been a Celtic great. Rapid Vienna were a bunch of thugs. A European night under floodlights to turn on the spell that win 3-0.
Billy McNeill leaves in June 1983.
With manager Hay preferring a strike force of ex-Motherwell man Brian McClare and Maurice Johnston.
Mo Johnston, was celebrity. He was stardust. He was a goal scorer. He was brilliant.
The signing of the ex-Celtic striker rubbed salt into the wounds of Hoops fans.
At probably 1986 at Love Street, Albert Kidd Day.
Albert Kidd, Dundee's substitute and Celtic supporter, had come off a bench to deliver a fatal blow to the Jam Tars.
Introduced to the green and white hooked home shirt for the first time was the Celtic crest.
To celebrate the club's centenary season, a new red brick facade was built.
Things had to change at Celtic because they were changing elsewhere. The 87-88 season, marking 100 years, they needed someone special to take them through that.
McNeill had the task of rebuilding a squad stripped bare by an array of departures.
It was a big deal to win the league in your centenary season.
McStay was a football architect. He was a man who could change the course of the game in a heartbeat.
I'm glad to say that on the line I have the one and only George McCluskey.
Welcome, Anton Rogan. Our guest this week, of course, needs no introduction. Frank McAvenny.
It was a centenary cup final and we scored with 5 minutes before the end. That is Absolutely. Celtic in a nutshell.
Tommy Burns playing for a people and a cause.
Celtic needed a platform and called the Celtic Views.
And that, in a way, sums up the 80s. Like a great party with a terrible hangover.
Now we join Chris McGuigan for part 10 of the series, where, with his guests, he will cover the period of 1990 to 1994.
It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic over all.
Chapter 10, Celtic Football Club, 1990 to 1994. With the Scottish Cup clasped firmly in his right hand, Roy Aitken raised both arms high in jubilation and triumphantly thrust the trophy aloft. Season 1987-88, Celtic's centenary year, had just come to the most dramatic and wonderful of conclusions. A memorable league and cup double had been claimed during a fairy tale campaign, but the renewed sense of hope stirred by that glorious centenary year would seem a distant dream by the start of a new decade. By the early 1990s, concerns about the Kelly and White dynasty, which had ruled the club for so long, had been growing. Since the failure to invest in the 1988 double winning side, the support were becoming increasingly worried about the capability and motivation of the Parkhead board. The lack of investment was obvious on and off the pitch, and there existed a real fear that current custodians were incapable of adapting to the modern football environment. An historical policy of prudence had meant the Bhoys had failed to fully capitalise on the glory years of the Stein era. Now the club were being left behind by the aggressively ambitious Rangers. On the pitch, commercially, and in terms of stadium facilities, Celtic were, at best, an embarrassingly distant second to their rivals. In season 1989-90, the Hoops finished in a lowly 5th place, with just 10 points more than basement side Dundee. A bid for a third successive Scottish Cup would fall at the final hurdle, when after a goalless 120 minutes, Aberdeen emerged victorious from a marathon penalty shootout. Despite missing the start of that campaign with injury, English centre-half Paul Elliott, a summer signing from Italian club Pisa, quickly established himself as a firm fans' favourite. Physically strong, commanding in the air, and confident on the ball, Elliott was an excellent acquisition. Polish striker Dariusz Jakinowski was another new arrival. The immensely talented striker would hit 4 goals in a dramatic 5-4 second leg home victory over Partizan Belgrade in the European Cup Winners' Cup. But agonisingly, the Celts would concede late on to crash out on away goals. Sadly, disco-loving Jakinowski lacked the commitment to make the most of his considerable talents. Frustratingly, his brilliance was witnessed all too rarely. Season 1990-91 would be Celtic's first without European football since 1978-79. The Bhoys would suffer a 2-1 League Cup final defeat to Rangers. They would finish third in the league and exit the Scottish Cup at the semi-final stage to Motherwell. The talented John Collins had arrived from Hibernian, and along with the ever-excellent Paul McStay, gave Celtic a depth of talent in midfield which was desperately lacking elsewhere on the park. The once adored Charlie Nicholas had returned to the club after a £400,000 move from Aberdeen. The striker had retained a fine touch, but the return in Nicholas lacked the speed, hunger and swagger of the confident youth who had lit up Parkhead a decade before. After another trophyless campaign, Billy McNeil would be axed and replaced by the inexperienced Liam Brady. The Celtic job was Brady's first managerial post. His talent as a player had been immense, but his knowledge of Scottish football and management was minuscule.
It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic overall.
It's my absolute pleasure to say on the line this evening I have Average Joe Miller and JB Banal from Not The View Fanzine. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, how are you doing? Good evening.
Going to start off tonight talking about Not The View, because if anybody doesn't know, both JB Banal and Average Joe Miller have been involved in Not The View from the very beginning, and that's when we all learned that maybe just things weren't right at Celtic. Would that be a fair assessment?
It's pretty fair, yeah.
So what made you start off with a fanzine? Before we get into the decade itself, what made you start off to write a fanzine?
It was after the last game of the 1987 season, 86-87 season I think it was, and we used to drink in a pub in Glasgow. Always used to meet up after the match, and obviously the topic of conversation would get round to Old Celtic, and the thing about it at the time was that the Celtic View, that's why it's called Not The View, because the Celtic View had degenerated by that time into Pravda, and so any time you read a letter in it and stuff, it was all hats off to Jack McGinn, they're doing a great job and all the rest of it, and it was totally divorced to the reality of the situation. And it just, over the course of a drunken night, it just, somebody came up with the idea of, well, let's do a magazine of our own, and that's basically how it started. It was myself and George of the Jungle, and I don't know if George had been into fanzines or that, but it was all very much a cut and paste job, and it went on sale the start of the following season. The Celtic versus Rangers match, God rest them, and it was one that Billy Stark scored, and we'd managed to cobble together. I did it on a typewriter and pasted it all up, and George of the Jungle photocopied it at his work, and we made about 500 of them, I think, about 16 pages or whatever it was, and we stood outside shouting sacked the board and holding up this wee photocopied fanzine, and it was sold out in about 10 minutes.
Were you surprised at the reaction, or do you think, nah, here we go, this is cert?
No, I was shocked, actually, to tell you the truth. There was, there's a lot of grumbling and stuff going on, but you were never quite sure how many people were into that whole sack the board idea, And
a fanzine, I mean, this is probably the first Celtic fanzine. We go back in history, kind of thing, there was something very similar. But to have a fanzine where you a wee bit, what would be the best way to put it? It was very brave of you to actually stand outside the stadium selling your own wee magazine, wasn't it?
Well, I think even as you go through the next few, next hour or so, you'll talk about a lot of things, I'm sure, about, fan movements and stuff like that. But there's always in Celtic, even in those days, there was always 10,000 people still going along. So there's always been a kind of you never criticise Celtic mentality. It seemed to strike a chord with a lot of people, I think a lot of people were quite heartened at the fact that other folk thought the same way, if you see what I mean.
I seen the fanzine on sale and I just thought, this is exactly what I'm thinking. And I'm sure hundreds and thousands of Celtic fans were thinking the same thing. And that's how I got in touch with the guys. I says, look, you're not on the same wavelength here. There's others like us that you can put things through.
Did you get any adverse reaction whenever you stood there and sold it? Did some people think you were loonies?
Yeah, of course.
The Celtic board. Yeah. But you always have fans that will not criticise anything.
But you still get that today, never mind fanzines back in the 80s.
Guys won't even discuss things like that at times, which is a very strange way to kind of go through life.
So to take us both back to life in the 1990s, we still had Billy McNeil in charge of the team, and we were starting to really feel the effect of the revolution that was Rangers. What was the atmosphere among the fans like at that stage whenever you're standing there selling the fanzine?
Well, I think anybody that's buying it, I think, is buying into the idea for a start. And so if you're selling it and folk are buying it, then it's a case of keep up the good work kind of thing, more power to your elbow, that idea. Now, you didn't have to be a genius to realise that we were getting left behind, way behind, and that something had to be done. And I'm not sure how many of us actually knew what had done. So what was clear, that it couldn't go on as going, and that we had to get rid of the board.
So that first year that we're talking about in the 90s, we're starting to see a few of the mainstays leave the team. The likes of Roy Aitken and Tommy Burns. And it really was starting to be the sign that Celtic weren't going to be able to compete with Rangers.
The saddest things that like Roy Aitken, for example, was getting pelters by the time he left. I don't think there was a lot of people kind of glad to see the back of him, which is a bit of a shame, And yeah, you're right. It was the guys that were coming in were clearly not the same calibre. But wasn't that always a case with Celtic though? And it's been going on and on for years that. You always thought that, because don't forget we'd won the double in '88. It wasn't that long before, and they always got there were always 2 or 3 players short of a good team, a team that could do well. And then before those 2 or 3 players arrived, they would sell 2 or 3. We're back to square one again.
Yet still, we, as you rightly say, we still had we were still Scottish Cup winners. We just saw the Joe Miller Cup final the year before, and here we were. Not a fantastic season, but ended up in the cup final.
It was an awful final, and Joe Miller coming in and playing through the middle, and kind of, I think it was like 4 games in a trot or something. They played that, and it just kind of changed the team for that wee period, that length of time we needed to win the cup, because Rangers were odds on, absolutely odds on to tank us.
Joe Miller was one of these guys. It was actually a signing. There was no great clamour for signings, if you remember. Just straight out the blue, they went and they got this guy, and he was a reasonably good player, But it wasn't a case of panic buying or anything like that. They bought him halfway through the season or something, didn't they?
Well, this is a time whenever Mo Johnson had obviously joined Rangers, and we opted for Jackie Jagodowski, and with guys like Mike Galloway in the team as well, Tommy Coyne. But the team just didn't seem to gel that year apart from the run we had in the cup. But getting through the cup final, it was you would have thought that Celtic had saved their blushes for another season and were going to lift another trophy.
Yeah, but again, they didn't. They didn't have the wherewithal to strengthen that team. But we know now, hindsight's a great thing and all that, but at the time, it was just depressing what was happening. All the players that they were signing and what have you.
Alright, so I'm absolutely chuffed to say that I have Matt McGlone, famously from Celts for Change, on the line today. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing absolutely fine, Chris, apart from the Carrigandy result, which put me in a bit of a downer yesterday, but apart from that, I'm up again today.
So, Matt, we're finally at the early 90s as part of the Celtic History podcast, and the role that Celts for Change played in the transformation of the club really can't be underestimated by the supporters. Give us a wee brief history of how and why Celts for Change was set up.
Celts for Change was set up, and it came from the various branches of enthusiasm for Celtic. I was doing a fanzine in 1990 called Once a Tim, Always a Tim. One of the reasons the fanzine started up was Brian Dempsey was the sort of first non-family type member to be invited onto the Celtic board, and it was seen as a sort of new thing that somebody with fresh ideas was coming into Celtic, and a real big supporter of Brian. I thought, he had energy, he had enthusiasm, and he had the wherewithal to sort of make a difference at Celtic. Fast forward 6 months later, and Brian was out the door, and really that gave me a hell of a lot of energy to sort of start questioning what was going on at Celtic. When people who came in with fresh ideas were being shown the door so quickly, that told you everything, that really it was a closed shop within Celtic Park. And being the editor of the fanzine, Once a Tim, Always a Tim, it was my responsibility, I felt, to sort of try and do something about this. The years had went on, and round about 1993, Brendan Sweeney and myself had met up, and we got a few other guys together, and I put an advert into the Daily Record, which cost about 90 quid. I always remember that. That was a sore £90 for me at the time. It cost about 90 quid to put an advert. Basically, I said, if you care about your club, turn up at the City Halls tomorrow night, and we'll have a chat about it. About 35 people turned up, including Brendan, and I stood up in an upturned lemonade box and just said, "Hi, my name's Matt McGlone. I do a fanzine called Once a Tim, Always a Tim. I'm concerned at the way Celtic have been run. I feel that it's the fans the fans can really do something about this here if they really care about the club." Now, if you think back to those days, people sort of just went along. There wasn't any sort of revolutionary sort of football movements going on at the time. This was all pretty new. And would fans really take to this, standing up against the hierarchy at the club? Would they have the commitment to see it through? It's a big ask. It's a real big ask for something that had never really been done before in football. But thankfully, the fans got involved, and from the second meeting, I put another advert in. From the second meeting, I'd hired the same 50-room hall, 50-seater hall, and I was walking up towards the candle rigs where the Glasgow City Halls was, and I saw all these fans standing down the candle rigs and snaking round the corners. And I thought, crikey, what's going on here? There's another Celtic night being booked, instead of ours.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, actually, because you said there in the first meeting there was 35 people turned up.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
But in this day and age of 2013, everybody I know was at that meeting. There was 100,000 there. You sure you got your numbers right?
I got my numbers right, I counted them. But they may have been at the second meeting. But it's a great thing to say. I mean, you would never argue with anybody who said it was at the first meeting. That's part of the history and culture of the whole revolution thing amongst the fans, and everybody's entitled to say they're at the first meeting as far as I'm concerned.
But you have the names and addresses of everybody there?
Remember these days, Chris, there was no internet, there was no social media. Getting word out was by putting adverts in papers and putting and getting leaflets printed and handing them out and putting posters up and things like that. Now, when you've got a normal life and you've got a family life and you've got your work life to sort of to deal with, this really encroaches on your time, and it's very easy to be put off and sort of say, I need to get back to my normal life here. But thankfully, so I turned up at the door, and I must have had a quick look, and I thought there's hundreds here. Turned up at the door, and there was sort of a big steward guy there, and he said, I need to go to the back of the queue, mate. And I said, no, I've organised a meeting for Celtic for Change here. We had one 2 weeks ago, and, we've got another one tonight. And he said, I need to go to the back of the queue. And I said, no, I'm organising it. And he said, the guys, a lot of fans were standing there with their strips on and scarves. It was fantastic. It was early December. And we went in, and at that meeting, there's a few other guys that came on board. On the table that night is David Cunningham, myself, Brendan Sweeney. I think John Thompson was there as well. And Brendan had brought David along. David had been in school with Brendan, and he knew him as a die-hard Celtic fan. So the group was sort of getting together. And
did you all know each other, Matt, beforehand, or did you just sort of?
Nobody knew anybody.
Really?
Apart from David Cunningham had went to school with Brendan Sweeney. That's the only two who knew each other. I didn't know any of them. And it's amazing, the five guys were myself, Colin Duncan, Brendan Sweeney, David Cunningham, and the very aptly named John Thompson. Fantastic name to have in your group there. So we all gelled together, and from there on in we get the head down, and we met in people's houses, we met in pubs, we met in each other's houses, we arranged things, we formed a name, and we attended rallies, we created demonstrations, and we held all sorts of things to try and get the fans on board. Now, let me tell you, it's okay 20 years later saying it was a great success and all that, and it was a great success, no doubt about it, but this was very difficult because a lot of people were saying, who are these guys, what are they all about, we're Celtic fans, who are you, what's your background, da-da-da-da-da. Now, in those days, a bit younger, you felt you didn't have to sort of justify yourself to anybody. But again, we had to learn a wee bit about how to do it properly, and we all showed a great deal of patience and got the message across. And I have to say, the other four guys in Celtic for Change were just different class. Absolutely, I won't meet their calibre again.
So, Celtic for Change started in 1993, but there was Save Our Celts, run by Willie Wilson in 1991.
That's right.
Why did you just not phone up Willie and join that? What was the difference between the two groups, Matt? Because I think in the annals of history that's been sort of cloudy a little bit.
It hasn't been left out by me because I wrote a book, Emotionally Celtic, and I pointed Willie's part out in the book. Willie had held a couple of meetings. One was at Shettleston Town Hall, and I think it was by invite only. Anyway, I got an invite along to it, and Brian Dempsey was there. I think Brian spoke that day, and there was various ideas put around. And just through time and the tenacity it takes, I just think Willie, having a family, etc., or whatever his personal situation was at the time, very difficult to try and keep these things going. No, you're right. The Save Our Celts was the very first sort of meeting of fans, but unfortunately it never really got off the ground, and that's a great pity because I know Willie, and Willie's a cracking guy. And I think Willie was just busy at the time because he wasn't in Celtic for Change. But funny enough, I met him recently, minus some of the hair that he had in those days. And, had a great chat with him. And a real big Celtic fan, Willie is.
So, let's fast forward to 1983. Right? So, September 1983, Celtic for Change is just getting going. And you're saying there about 35 people turned up to the first meeting. You had the four guys sort of driving this on. Was the reason for doing it something that you came up with on your own? Did you see other fans complaining? Obviously, there was a lot of frustration at the time among the supporters. You were writing a fanzine at the time. Was it all just a combination of enough's enough, we'll have to do something?
Yeah, I think so. And you'd asked me earlier on if I knew those guys, and I didn't, and that's the great thing. The great thing is that people you didn't even know in your life had the same energy and commitment as yourself. you don't know where it comes from. You just don't know when your energy comes from to see this through. None of us had ever done this before. None of us had ever done public speaking. All of us used to absolutely cack ourselves when we were at a wedding, having to say something at a wedding. And here we were, standing up on a stage, and I had made a point to all the guys, not just me speaks, all the guys speak. And, they just took to it like a duck to water. They went up there. And I've always preached that if you've got enthusiasm, drive, commitment, and unbelievable faith in what you're saying, then standing up on a stage will come quite easily to you. Because it comes from the heart, and the enthusiasm comes from how you feel. The frustration, there was anger, there was resentment, there was a real love of Celtic, and all of these components put together, I feel, made the group a success. And I have to say that when you have your own life and you're doing this part-time, it was difficult. It was very, very difficult. We all had difficulties. We all had relationships at the time, and there was difficult times there for all the lads. But I've got to say, everybody saw it through. And, there was so many experiences right through to March 4th, 1994. Mm-hmm. But, sometimes the heads were down and we'd try and keep each other going. And I remember I came up one day to my mother's house and my head was down, and my mother was, at that time, early 70s. She's been dead, 10 years now. And she would say, I didn't bring you up like that, walking about in here with your head down. You get your head up here. You've started something. Get along with these other guys here. Keep this going. You have to keep doing this. This is about Celtic. This is something you love, son. This is something you really love. And you must keep going. And when your mother sort of says something like that to you, you sort of say, right, that was a wee spur I needed. That was a wee spur I needed. And I remember one night, we had a meeting, it must have been round about in maybe December 93 at Govan Town Hall, and I would say there was at least 1,000 people there, at least 1,000 people, and I was standing on the stage and all the other guys were doing the bit and were trying to say what was going on and how the fans can get motivated. That's what all the rallies were about, trying to tell the fans what was going on. We had ears in the background, we had various different people who were influential, we knew stuff that was coming through. We tried to give that message over to the fans to say, look, this is what's going on in the background here. This club are running into debt. They're at £4.5 million debt. We know for sure they cannot pay this off. Celtic are in critical danger here. If the people who own the club cannot pay their own debts, what's going to happen? It's inevitable. You fall into the hands of somebody else, which could be anybody. Mm-hmm. So then you're insecure, the club are insecure, and if we look at what happened to Rangers, then Celtic for Change was a lesson to them, which unfortunately for them, they never heeded 19 years later.
Oh, very sad, very sad.
Yeah, it's extremely sad. Imagine giving them 90 years notice and they don't take any heed of it,
So here you were, Matt, right? So
I'll just finish off there. So on the meeting at Govan Town Hall, there was, good reception, and then there was people questions what you're all about, and my mother, I said, wee pensioner, and she just walked out the crowd, and I saw her out the side of my eye, and I thought, Jesus Christ, where's she going? And she came up the side of the stage, she just walked up as if I was 5 years of age, nudged me to the side, pulled the mic out my hand, and stood there and said, listen, what's all this negativity here? These boys here being questioned, this, that, and the next thing. Do you know these boys are going through? These boys have got jobs, they've got marriages, they've got kids, they've got commitments, they've got this, that, and the next thing. And all you can bloody do there is sit and be negative. We're all Celtic supporters, we're all trying to do something about it. So why don't you stop being negative? If you want to be negative, there's the door. And I was standing there, frozen. My lips were stitched, absolutely frozen. I looked around at the rest of the lads, and they looked at me, and nobody moved a muscle. And the hall stood up, rose, and clapped her, and she walked off. And I have to say, that wee instant act, just coming from her emotion, knowing she got to know some of the guys at a very late age in her life. She got to know some of the guys that were doing it. And this was just a wee something from her which she saw as an injustice, and she wanted to say something about it.
Would she get her out of the plaque?
Point in the campaign.
Would she get her out of the plaque?
Aye, she was a wonderful fan of supporting me. Not a woman who went to football all the time, but she was just, if I was trying to do something, she would support her son 100% and give him her backing.
So just at the start of the 90s, we had, of course, Mo Johnson playing for Rangers. We were starting to see some of the Celtic players leaving, and the quality of the players that were leaving compared to the quality of the players that they were being replaced by was very worrying at the time.
So I absolutely agree, Chris. It was with a few diamonds like John Collins, but the vast majority of the players were second rate. They were coming through and we were signing and things like that. And the dark side, they were just seemed to getting stronger. They had a conveyor belt of international players coming to join them, and it was gut-wrenching, to be honest with you. It was probably at the time that I started taking my youngest brother. I got a parent and child season ticket at the front of the main stand, and I basically dragged him all round about Scotland, following us everywhere. So I never missed a game in the lean period. It's probably what makes me appreciate it more just now, the way things are going with the club. But at the time it was turgid to watch. We were losing games. I used to have a bet with Motherwell supporters and things like that on Celtic Motherwell games, and they were winning more money off me than I was taking off them. So it was tough times, mate, tough times.
But the season went right to the end. We made it to the cup final, and there always still seemed to be this little sort of spark of optimism that we were going to be able to come back. But I think that cup final against Aberdeen was a real marker in the sand for where we were.
I would agree, and especially like beating them the year before, the Joe Miller final, and then getting to cup final. It was always a mark that every year as a Celtic supporter you looked forward to Hampden, because we had a pretty good record of getting to cup finals. But that one, it was Aberdeen team, and Charlie Nicholas obviously playing with Aberdeen at the time, but we took it to penalties, and a lot of people blamed Anton Rogan, but he hit the target. Dobchek was the penalty taker for the Polish national team, and he missed the target. But and little did we know that after then it was going to be lean times for the next 5 years, and terrible times following Celtic. But that was probably a bit of a watershed, mate. We realised then that we weren't very good.
I remember watching this game, and when it went to penalties, thought, I just don't know.
Well, do you know what, man? I just think there's a pessimism in Celtic fans, and I just think I was at that game, and I didn't think for a minute we would win that penalty kick shootout.
Aye, and I think that Celtic fans, we are pessimistic. I think, when I was a kid growing up following Celtic in the late 70s, early 80s, we had a real good side, and I was always optimistic. But then when it got to the A-times and the changing of management staff and just unrest in the boardroom, unrest in the terraces, you just you were just waiting it. I know the Oasis in the desert was the centenary season when we won the double, and that's sort of written in the stars as Celtic. We do special things at special times, but you just find I don't know, I was sort of brow-broken at around about the early 90s. It was terrible.
See, when you look back though, right, and I don't know, I have a lot of fondness for a lot of the players that we brought in. We still had the guts of the centenary team. Like McAvenny obviously left, but we brought in Jakarowski, Paul Elliott, Dovchek, Collins. These were all good players. We should have had a better performance side, if you like, for the players that came in. But the problem was, I think, we sort of replaced players like for like when players left, and we had a team probably good enough to win the Premier League, if it was the Premier League as it was in the 80s. We got on in the 90s, Rangers that took it a step further with the signings they were making, so they were replacing players with a higher level of player all the time, where we were just going like for like. So we were slowly in decline because they were on the rise all the time.
But at the start of 1990-91, the players that we signed was John Collins, and John re-signed, and even Martin Hayes, who I know in hindsight maybe didn't work out the way we all expected, but they were all players that we had heard of. And you think of the Collins situation, it seemed like John Collins was the Robbie Keane of his time. We were always going to sign John Collins, and then he finally puts pen to paper. And starting off that season, I remember having huge optimism.
I can tell you an interesting wee story about John Collins when he signed for us. Obviously, after the Petit Merde situation and Mo Johnson doing the year before doing the about turn, Before John Collins penned the deal for us, Rangers contacted him and doubled his wages, asked him what we were offering him, and he went and had a meeting with Walter Smith, and they were going to double the wages. So he went then back to Celtic and says, look, this is the situation, and I think in his heart of hearts he wouldn't have signed with them anyway, but he says this is the situation, and this is what Celtic had to get an emergency board meeting, and they rubber stamped it to give John Collins equal what Rangers offered.
The beginning of the 1990s saw Celtic Park having to try and conform with the findings of the Taylor Report following the disaster at Hillsborough and the devastating loss of 96 innocent lives. Although the report found that the main cause of the disaster was that of a failure of police control, several recommendations regarding the stadiums themselves were made. These included recommendations to remove perimeter fences, stricter controls on the sale of alcohol inside the stadium, something which had already been implemented in Scotland following the Hampden riot of 1980, but perhaps most crucial was the recommendation that all major stadia should be converted to all-seated venues. Both the English Football League and the Scottish Football League chose to act on that recommendation, and a deadline of August 1994 was set for the top division in Scotland and the top two divisions in England for all clubs to have their facilities in place. While stadiums like Ibrox that had been vastly upgraded following the disaster there in 1971 and the brand new McDermott Park in Perth were already ahead of the game, others such as Celtic Park where only the main stand was seated now needed a great deal of work. Indeed, the installation of electronic scoreboards attached to the roof at either end of Celtic Park, while welcome, were now a very small start to the changes it would need to follow. As such, the Celtic board now began to come up with alternatives. The first suggestion came from the short-lived board member Brian Dempsey, who was behind a push for the club to move to a brand new stadium in Rob Royston, several miles north of Parkhead. However, he was something of a lone voice, perhaps due to his own involvement in the Rob Royston land. This move was not favoured by the rest of the Celtic board, and director Chris White took to the Celtic View in November 1990 to illustrate why Dempsey had been removed the previous month. In that article, he stated that Celtic had looked at several options, including sites in Rob Royston, Cambuslang, Strathclyde Park and Linwood. Specifically, Rob Royston could be problematic because the area was a designated green belt, and as such planning permission could be fraught with difficulties. There were also question marks as to whether or not Glasgow District Council would grant the permission for the accompanying commercial add-ons. Without those, Celtic could be starved of an important revenue stream. With the upfront costs being estimated at £50 million, Celtic would be looking at funding large interest repayments without the planned income to cover it. The favoured option was a phased upgrade of the existing stadium. Again, these would involve large costs to the club, estimated to be around £35 million. However, this cost would not all be needed up front. A new seated stand to replace the jungle was estimated at £15 million and was seen to be a more reasonable target. The full plans, dubbed by some as the Parkhead the Princes, due to the resemblance to the Paris Saint-Germain home ground, were first seen in the Celtic View in August 1990 and again in more detail in November 1990. These plans would see two-tier stands replacing the jungle as well as east and west terracing. Given the choice between an expensive move to pastures new or a phased upgrade of the ground where Celtic had played for almost 100 years, it was clear to all why this was the favoured option. And yet, despite everything that Chris White had said in November 1990, by April 1992 Celtic chairman Kevin Kelly was next to use the Celtic View to tell the support of Paradise Found in a £100 million development at Cambuslang. These new plans and a greenfield site would consist of a 52,000 capacity stadium initially built to hold 32,000 and two touchline stands. In addition to the new stadium, the wider development would include a hotel, a retail village, an 8-screen multiplex, a permanent performance stage, office units, fast food restaurants and even the Celtic Heritage Museum. This time, the Celtic View article informed everyone that Celtic had considered other options, such as moving to Hampden. However, Scotland's national stadium was shot down due to traffic access issues, as well as Queen's Park taking too long in negotiations. Linwood and Rob Royston were again mentioned, with Linwood being cited as one of the better options, illustrating just how far the board were willing to move the club if necessary. Indeed, the Linwood option was rejected more because there were existing retail plans rather than because it moved the club away from its spiritual home in the east end of Glasgow, although such comment was made almost as an afterthought. Other sites for Celtic's new home that had been considered included a former shunting yard at St Rollox in the north of the city, the Proven Gasworks in Royston, the former Gartlock Hospital in Easterhouse, and the former British Steel strip mill at Gartcosh in the northeast of the city. Closer to home, the derelict former British rail yard between Duke Street and Belgrove Station just off the Gallagate had been considered, as had the site of Belvedere Hospital off London Road and the Cunnagar loop across the River Clyde from the training ground at Barrowfield. None of these options had quite been right for the Celtic board, and Cambuslang was now the future for Celtic. By November 1992, the Celtic board once again took to the Celtic View to reassure supporters that any talk of the new site being a toxic time bomb was wide of the mark. Something called geotechnic studies had been carried out and no major issues had been found. The most worrying aspect though was the report that the stadium could suffer flooding from the River Clyde once every 100 years. Given how long the existing Celtic Park had now been in place, no one seemed to mind this tiny detail. More detail was also released as to how the stadium would take shape. The first stage was to raise £26 million to build the first two touchline stands, followed by a further £4 million for single-tier stands at either end which would have no roofs. A further £15 million would be required to add the second tiers, including the roofs, at either end. The support were assured that cash is on the table, but further examination of this revealed big money backers are waiting in the wings, choosing to remain in the background until a decision is taken on the council planning permission. In the meantime, the existing Celtic Park would need to limp on. With the August 1994 deadline getting ever closer, the sad sight of an all-seater jungle became a reality in June 1993. Unfortunately, as Hampden Park was undergoing renovation itself, the final standing match for the much-loved jungle was to be the Scottish Cup final between Rangers and Aberdeen. Fortunately, a hastily arranged match following that final between veterans of Celtic and Manchester United allowed many Celtic supporters to turn up and blow away the blues. Fortunately, the sight of a seated jungle would not last more than a season. If Cambuslang sounded too good, or arguably too horrible, to be true, then it was. The promise of funding were indeed made without substance, eventually being shown up for the nonsense that they were in February 1994 when Kevin Kelly named London-based Geffinor as being financial backers for the development. When Geffinor were contacted, they denied all knowledge. In addition, Superstadia, the company apparently behind the designs for the new stadium, also knew nothing of Cambuslang. With the lies now unravelling fast, the Celtic board were about to unravel themselves.
But when you saw the state of the stadium and you saw how Rangers had developed Ibrox after the Ibrox disaster, and you saw the investment that Murray and Souness were now putting into Rangers, but as a Celtic supporter you still, even in 1990, expected the team to compete. You never ever saw Rangers doing 9 in a row at that stage.
Never thought that, because that was a joke. It's a records one. Like the bar record, 9 in a row kind of thing. You'd never in a million years think that they would ever come near it. They were pushing as much as they could. Obviously, we knew what they were trying to do. They were trying to beat 9 in a row. They were trying to get the European Cup, do anything they could to put us out, basically. And we were just stagnant. We weren't moving at all. And we were stagnant in the jungle as well. And that was like a right throwback. That was like still like the 70s, you know.
But still, when you look at the attendances and stuff that year, and you look at the crowds that we pulled against the likes of Rangers and stuff as well, the fans hadn't walked away from the club at this stage.
But they hadn't walked away when the easy beats were all getting hammered. You know, you still go and support your team.
We'll take you back to before we get too far ahead of ourselves. I'll take you back to the cup final, and when the game went to penalties against Aberdeen. Did everybody expect Anton to score?
Well, so when it comes to penalty shootouts, I don't expect any of them to score. To be honest.
And to be fair, if you're going to pick someone, it would be poor Anton to miss it.
Wasn't it the case as well during that? Because by that time, correct me if I'm wrong, but Anton wasn't one of the first 5, was he?
No, he was in the sudden death.
Yeah, so by that time, you know, by the time it comes to Anton, there's all the guys that don't want to take them. And Jack Janowski, for instance, who you mentioned earlier on, he wouldn't take one. He wouldn't take one of your 5. or he was petrified to actually go and take a penalty that day. Anton goes up, misses, and there you go. It'd be a shame if that's all he's remembered for.
I think he dines out on it now.
Well, he's got a good sense of humour there.
So when we started the next season and the team was starting to rebuild, it wasn't just on the pitch where we started to add people, because at that time we had Dr. Michael Kelly, who was the former Lord Provost of Glasgow, and Brian Dempsey, both appointed to the board. Well, kind of appointed to the board. I think
I was thinking at the time, if you're appointing somebody whose name isn't Kelly or White, you think, well, that's a step in the right direction. Because up until then, the board had been comprised of people who were picked from a very shallow gene pool, if you see what I mean. we know qualifications other than your name's Kelly or your name's White.
So how did Brian Dempsey get involved in all this then?
You'd have to ask Brian Dempsey the hows and the whys of it, but it seemed to me that he was willing to do it. He had a bit of sort of business background and had a few ideas, and obviously I think he'd been taking out some corporate or something with them at the time, hadn't he? And
he was a good businessman who had a kind of profile about the city as well, and that probably helped him as well when he joining the Celtic board.
I think some of the Dempsey family were involved in politics and stuff in Lanarkshire as well. He also had the touch of the politician about him. He was able to schmooze the fans a bit as well. I think he would have been at the time a good prospect for them to have on the board, because things were beginning at that time to look bad for them. I think they were getting a lot of bad press.
But Dempsey didn't actually last very long on the board.
I don't really know what he was bringing to the table for them. As Jerry said, they probably brought him on board because he was kind of a fan, appealing to the fans rather than giving them something, So I think it was kind of more to appease the fans more.
I think anybody that comes into that cabal, that sort of clique that they had, it's all right bringing in new ideas and stuff, but I think if the ideas struck them as being a bit too much or a bit too radical, I think that's when you would get your wings clipped, and maybe that was the thinking behind it.
It had nothing to do with the fact that we're playing Rangers in the League Cup final the following week, whenever the AGM was held, and he was out again then.
Well, I don't know about the shenanigans behind it. The timing of it, of course, was atrocious, as you say. But that's the kind of cack-handed way they did their business, I think, a lot of the time.
So coming up to that cup final that year, Celtic must have really fancied themselves a wee bit, because you had the whole trouble over at Ibrox between Butcher and the club, and he wanted to leave, and he was fit and then he wasn't fit, and then he was fit and then he wasn't fit, and then of course you had Johnson, who was injured for the final as well. So Celtic must have really fancied themselves.
I honestly can't remember the prevailing mood at the time for that particular game, but in a one-off game against them, you'd like to think that Celtic had a chance, but I think that would have been a blip rather than a trend, if you see what I mean.
But still, when you look at guys like Paul Elliott in the team, and Paul Elliott scored that day, and we're a goal up, and everything in the garden was rosy for a little while anyway.
Again, I mean, Paul Elliott was a great player. I thought I really, really liked the guy, but look who else was in the defence. It wasn't really a defence that was rock solid, was it?
There were certain players that was carrying the team, and Paul Elliott, I thought as well, was one of them. Certainly showed a lot of heart and good footballer, but again, he was carrying so many others.
But still, when Walters equalised that day, you just knew the game was over, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I mean that's happened so many times. It was never a team that had a great deal of bottle about it either.
So we finally lost in extra time. Richard Gough scored, and coming out from the game that day, again the feeling among the supporters were something's got to change.
I'll probably learn a bit more from the likes of Paul McStay, who's my sort of age, and Peter Grant, because they were just there a few years before me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand, they were playing Paul was in a team when he was 16, wasn't he?
Right.
I think Peter Grant, he was in a team when he was 17. So they had a little bit of influence on me as well. I spoke to Peter yesterday, actually, you know.
Uh-huh.
I speak to Peter regular. So, but he's the same as usual.
I would go into what he thought about his time at Celtic, but that would be very unfair.
Well, as I say, it's not to do with me.
No, that's what I mean.
As I say, he's my mate, and Chris, he's my mate, he knows me on it.
That wouldn't be fair. All right.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say nothing anyway, to be honest.
Maybe we'll get Peter Grant on in a year, so once the dust is settled.
There's nobody loves that club more than him.
Oh, I know that.
You know, and that's the way it is. He loves that club. You talk about people bleeding for clubs.
I know. It was disappointing all seeing the way it all worked out in the end, wasn't it?
But that's football, and he knows that. Football's ruthless.
So we won the double in the centenary year, Anton. Obviously, we were on the crest of a wave, and then the next year things just didn't work out too well, did they?
I don't know what happened. There's maybe a lot of things going on, but we just didn't perform the way we should have. The team was very different, if you understand. The team was the exact same, but we just didn't seem to get together.
Yeah. Although the cup final sort of papered over the cracks a wee bit, you know, obviously we stopped.
A little bit, but Jesus, that was a great game either, to be fair, was it?
It was an awful game.
That was probably one of the worst cup finals I've ever seen.
But you know what, it doesn't matter.
little Joe popped up, a little Snorky popped up.
It was fantastic, so it was.
It was indeed.
Did that sort of lift the spirits a wee bit in the camp when we won that day?
It did, but the league's the one, Chris, isn't it? You know, everybody can win a cup. I'm not being funny, but a lot of clubs can win cups, but the league is the one everybody wants to win. No matter what anybody says, you want to win the league, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
Because it's the best team in the year will win it. Over how many games? Whereas in a cup you play 7-8 games.
Did you, whenever you were playing at that stage, did you ever think you'd leave Celtic, Anton?
Chris, to be fair, you know, when it was going on, I did not. I thought, well, I'm here forever.
Yeah.
If you understand what I'm saying, I thought, well, I'm here, and I'm happy here. I loved it. I loved the club. It was a great couple of years there, you know. I thought, well, this will do me. This will do me.
I don't think any of us ever believed that it would be 1995 before we would actually win another trophy, with the exception of the Soccer Sixes.
You know, man, that was unbelievable. It is unbelievable. But I don't know, Chris, as I say, as soon as I walked out the door in 1990, I think it was October 1991, I went to Sunderland, and as soon as I walked out the door, I went, well, I'm out of here anyway, so there's no point looking back.
Yeah.
But obviously I'll look at the results, you know, when I was coming back from games in Sunderland, see how Celtic got on, and obviously I'll always want them to win. You get these people who leave clubs and go, oh, get beat. But I didn't. I wanted them to win.
Why did you leave, Anton? I know there was a wee bit of rumbling about wages, and then Darius Dovchak came in and all that kind of stuff. Was it just time?
I'll tell you what, there was lots of, probably, I don't know, Chris, a few reasons, but I got player of the year before a lot of all the clubs, you know, the season before Liam Brady arrived.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I went to Birds, I got player of the year Birds and all, and that's an honour in itself for me, Chris, you know, I love that one. You know, Birds Bar in Glasgow.
No, well.
I got player of the year there, mate, and that's just, that was 1981. And I thought, right, lovely, me setting up there. Billy Liam Brady came in, and obviously, I don't know, there's things, obviously, he didn't like the way I played or whatever, so I was finished training one day, and I walked in, he says, Anton, Chris, what do you call him, Tom Graham wants to speak to. I walked in the Tom's office, he says, what's wrong, Tom? He says, he looked at me, and I looked at him, I said, what is it? He says, Sunderland have come to you. He says, they've offered money for $400,000. I went, what? He says, you're going to have to go. I went, well, I'm going there now.
Really? Just as...
And that was it. I walked out there, if that was it.
You're joking?
That was it.
Uh-huh.
I spoke to Liam Brady, and I spoke to any one of them, and that was it, and I walked out the door, mate.
How'd you feel?
I was gutted, devastated, mate. It was ripped me. But I thought, well, what's the point of moaning about it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought I was going to moan. I walked out there and I went, fucking hell. I said, that's nice. I looked at Tom and he knew what I was thinking. I was looking at him and he's going, I could see, I don't know, there was a couple of things said between me and Tom which are private, you know.
Sure.
And I walked in and said, right, I'm off, Tom, I'll see you later. Bob, bye.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it?
And that was it. Yeah. That was the end of it, man. I jumped in the car the next morning and went down to Sunderland. The little John Viola. Went down with him and that was it. I haven't been back. I've been back once since to play on Mick Galloway testimonial and that was it. There's loads of them, Chris has just done it too. But I just say it, it's a club, right? There's a line, as you know, in football, no man is bigger than any club, which is fair enough. But there has to be a little line drawn in the sand somewhere, you know, if you understand.
Yeah.
But a club can't take the piss.
Yes.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, just shove you at the door like that, Bob. What would happen if I said, no, I don't want to go? I said, well, we'll need the money.
Yeah.
Said, well, I can just sit here, I'm not bothered. Then I'll be the baddie, if you understand. So there's loads of different scenarios, Chris, isn't there?
Well, you know, even you look at the way the game has changed today, that situation wouldn't happen today.
Oh, jeez, I wouldn't get anywhere near it.
You know?
Wouldn't get anywhere near it today, but football has changed so much, but it's beyond recognition for me, you know.
There was no talk at that time about the club being in real financial dire straits.
I just think at the time, Chris, it wasn't a done thing. We didn't have supporters who think they're accountants and things like that. The media wasn't, well, obviously the media was on their side, but the media, they didn't report on all that kind of stuff. Fans were just fans. We didn't concern ourselves with the other stuff behind the scenes, you know. We just sort of blindly followed and went to follow our team. Now I think with new media and things like that, people can get hold of information, whereas back then you just took what you got.
Definitely, man, because if you think I was, 17, 18 at that time, and every single bit of news you got was the updates on Radio Clyde. You never missed the STV news to get what the sports news like now. And if you think now that if you had to rely now what you were getting for the mainstream media as your news on Celtic, it just shows you how much rubbish we were fed back then. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, I totally agree.
This is where fans' culture really started to change, I thought, because it was in this era when you did start to take an interest in who was on the board and what he'd done and why he was there and all this kind of stuff. And then you see changes in the boardroom when the likes of Michael Kelly and Brian Dempsey arrive, and there's all the talk about, you know, Dempsey wanted to take the stadium to Rob Royston and things like that. And this was huge revolution at the time, as I remember it.
Definitely. I mean, Chris, but for me, I bought the Celtic View for like the pre-teens right up to whenever, and that was sort of where I got all my information about the club. And it wasn't until I started going on the bus to games and that, and suddenly you started reading Not the View, and then you'd hear the boys talking on the bus, and for me that's when my sort of opinion Celtic sort of changed and started, as you say, started taking more interest in what was going on behind the scenes, because before then I was only interested in the players in the park and results and having one up against Rangers. It was only then, because as you said, finances never even concerned me. It was nothing I ever thought about. I just thought we went out and replaced players like for like. But it wasn't until you started reading Not the View, and that culture did start to come into, I think, for a lot of Celtic fans at that time. And that is, I mean, you're right in saying that. That is when I started certainly taking a better interest in what was going on with the club.
But what was it like among the fans, as you guys remember it, whenever this idiotic idea of moving away from Celtic Park started to raise its head?
For me, it was. I always believed it would never happen, you know. But it was one of the things that you just didn't think about it, and it was as if it was going to go away. But the more you were hearing about it, and then the Celts for Change was formed, and as Harper says, with fanzine culture, you were reading certain things, then you started to worry, and you started to say, is this going to be lost to me? Is this where I've spent some of my happiest times growing up, walking to Celtic Park, although it wasn't the best areas and things like that, it wasn't the best of stadiums, but it was just walking on a Wednesday night towards that stadium with the floodlights and just like the smell and things like everything. It was some of your fondest memories as a kid, and you were just saying, is this going to be a loss to us? It was a frightening thought, to be honest with you. And that's when we all started taking more of an interest. That's me especially, and things like that. When you were on supporters buses, the bus conveners, things like that, you would go to went to some of the Celts for change meetings in the city halls in Glasgow and candle rigs, and you took more of an interest. But as I say, I was still like late teens, early 20s, so I wasn't really involved in all, but I just went blindly to follow Celtic week in, week out. But then you started to take more of an interest, and because it was that precious to you and you didn't want to lose it, and you certainly didn't want to move away from Celtic Park.
And then the first big challenge, as I remember it, came up in the League Cup final that year, because we had Rangers on this juggernaut moving forward, and we were still sort of hanging in there like an annoying little brother. And when the League Cup final came up, I remember thinking, if we can just win today, this will send a message out that Celtic are not going to be the pushover that Rangers were hoping they were going to be.
In League Cups, we had a terrible record. And still to this day, we've not got a very good record in League Cups. But that was at the time when you just knew that when you were playing them, the likelihood is you were going to lose. You know, you didn't go into the games with any confidence, whereas before in the 80s and things like that, you'd be mega confident of beating them. But it got to the stages that you had to have luck on your side, because they had better players than us.
But even when Paul Elliott scored that day, right, put us 1-0 up, I remember thinking, yes! You know, we've a real good chance here. And then Celtic just collapsed after that. And whenever Walter scored with about 5 minutes to go, I just thought, there's no way we're going to score another goal here.
Yeah, you knew the players sort of didn't believe that they could beat Rangers. You know, there was definitely a confidence issue, and obviously they looked as if they were going places, and we weren't. We were going, as Harper says, we were going back the way, but it was tough times.
Okay, so I'm delighted to say I am now talking to Brian Dempsey, who played a big part in the history of Celtic in the early 90s. Good afternoon, Brian Dempsey. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Chris. How are you?
I'm absolutely terrific. Absolutely terrific. Looking forward to my holidays, let's put it like that.
I'm sure you are.
Brian, tell us a wee bit about Brian Dempsey, because back in those days, you know, we had a lot of sort of history with the families of the Celtic board, having been there for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, to the ordinary Irish supporter, over the hill comes this guy called Brian Dempsey. Who is Brian Dempsey, and why were you involved in the board at the time?
Well, I had been for a couple of years advising the board. My solicitor was a gentleman called Jimmy Farrell, who was a director. And Celtic started running into difficulties. They knew, as a board of management, that football was taking on a different way, that wages were becoming much more expensive, that there were dangers coming in after the Taylor report, the tragedy of Liverpool, that there had to be changes. And I was asked to look at them, how they would do things, how would I recommend they do things, what would be a different approach to all of this. And they had other people advising them at the same time. I don't know what happened, but they asked to meet me one day and came to my factory. I manufactured timber kits and was a house builder. And to my surprise, asked me would I like to join the board.
Who are they?
They would be the Jack McGuinness chairman, Kevin Kelly, Chris White, Tom Grant, Jimmy Farrell.
Okay, and they just arrived at your door out of the blue?
No, about 2 days before it, they asked could they meet me.
Yeah.
And I thought it was another meeting to go over some of the things I'd been saying to them, because what I was saying to them in a nutshell was, and because of what I was saying to them, I told them that I would perhaps not be the director that they want, and I advised them not to have me as a director, because it needed serious restructuring and change as to who the company was, and that the supporters needed to have a much greater say and participation in the company. In simple English, the supporters should become the shareholders. So at this meeting, when they talked about joining the board, I mean, I was rather taken aback and told them that I did not think I was a man they wanted, which turned out to be prophetic, because inside 6 months we were battling away. Mm-hmm. Once inside the board, you learned a number of facts and realised that time was not as plentiful as they might have hoped, and that changes had to take place much more quickly than they might have hoped, but that the changes had to take place, which eventually happened.
So the board at that time, did they feel the pressure from the fans, or were they a little bit naive into this growing body that was starting to mobilise?
Some people, like no names, who are presently on the board and have spoken to me saying, I've been offered a seat at the board, what do you think? And I say, everyone makes their own choices in life. Whatever you do not become seduced by that blazer. You become a director in there and you look at Rangers, you can see it so glaringly at Rangers. You become seduced by the blazer. There is a feeling of importance in football circles anyway, and in European football circles as a club such as Celtic, and they lose reality or connection with the supporters. And I've noticed, and I've been asked to speak at dinners, and if directors are there, they're always giving up excuses about not doing things rather than saying why other things had to be done. So you immediately change your tack when you become the director. You become the poacher, now the gamekeeper. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's not an easy adjustment in anything in life, but something happens at Celtic that seduces individuals immediately, that they lose the real feeling of who they are.
And in 1980, when you joined the board then, Brian, did you go there feeling that you were going to be a little bit different from the existing board members of the time?
I don't know. It's hard now to look back, to be honest with you, Chris. I don't know how I felt. When I went, all I remember at board meetings was saying that you really need to think, gentlemen, really need to, and I make no secret of this, the chairman, Jack McGinn, would phone me and say, at the board meeting tonight, you get stuck into them, don't let them do this, you get, so I stupidly didn't see it that I was the whipping boy, creating he made the bullets and I was firing them, that I was conscious that time was running out and running out fast. If you wanted to keep Celtic at the forefront of European football, if you wanted to keep them a vibrant business, and more important than anything else, if you wanted to keep them the iconic institution that, for me, Celtic represented. And what Celtic represents to me is this. Growing up as a lad in industrial Lanarkshire, the ability to compete on a level playing field and to prove that irrespective of our background or heritage, of who we were or what we were, we could compete with the best and on many occasions beat them. That was what Celtic represented to me. Now that, thank God, in life and events have moved on, but Celtic was that institution that gave people of Irish Catholic background and the ethnic background, and for many of us the impoverished background, the ability to compete with the best. And no greater accolade than 1967 was a group of lads, all from the Glasgow area, could take on the prima donnas and the supremos of Europe and beat them. That's what Celtic was all about for me.
So at that time, Brian, did Brian Dempsey feel the pressure of the fans? Because really, whenever you were appointed to the board alongside Michael Kelly, your name was, he's a Celtic supporter. Did you feel that at the time?
No, I didn't feel the pressure then. I felt it later. I felt it very much later as things went on, and the press built up battles, and I was a reluctant participant many times, and I felt real concern for the Celtic support. In fact, too much, because Fergus offered me, he wanted me to go into Celtic, and I felt that I had done my bit, that I had taken on the Kellys and Whites and always said I wanted nothing out of this, nothing out of Celtic, and that therefore there was nothing in it for me, and I felt had I gone into Celtic I'd have been a hypocrite. I look back and wonder did I do right at the times, but I did feel the pressure, not from the fans, pressure for the Celtic support as we went through all the troubled times.
And you spoke on a few occasions in public at some of the Celtic rallies and things like that. How much of a challenge was that? Maybe speaking on a Tuesday night in front of a room full of Celtic fans, and then following up by going into the boardroom, a few days later. Was there two roles you had to play there?
No, I never found that difficult, because what I said to the Celtic support, I said in the boardroom. What I said in the boardroom, I said to the Celtic support. There was never any duplicity from me. There was only, you didn't have to be Einstein. There was only one way out for Celtic, is the way and I developed this with Fergus McCann. That is that the Celtic supporters had to take over the club. Now, with the ambitions being so high with Fergus, he needed much more money than my group originally planned and anticipated for. We were looking at, the bank wanted $1 million and then $3 million. We were looking at about $7 or $8 million to start reorganising Celtic. I never felt that I was two people, never, at any time, and still don't, and still get stopped and asked all sorts of things by the older Celtic support. It's easy for me to say how I feel because that's how I felt.
I don't think I meant that you sort of were double-tongued whenever you're speaking to one group and the end of the other. I think what I mean by that question is that as a Celtic fan going into the boardroom and maybe the other board members seeing that you enjoyed and conversed with a number of the fan groups at the time, how was their reaction whenever you were speaking in the boardroom? Was it different?
Yes, I'm sorry. Their reaction was no, because they felt they represented the fans as well.
Oh, really?
They had their own groups of people around them, all yes men and sycophants, who would tell them anything and do anything to get tickets. Remember, in those days, Celtic only had very few stand seats available. It was all terracings. So they had their own coterie of acolytes who told them what they wanted to hear. So in genuine terms, they felt genuinely, they equally voiced the aspirations of the fans.
And the meetings must have been quite stormy at that stage, were they?
Could be. They could be, and it was sometimes difficult for me coming into that environment, though I was used to robust arguments and debates around my own management table and encouraged it as an important development of any business. But I always watched and observed men who were, in many respects, timid, placid people, Kevin Kelly, Jack McGinn, as against robust people like Tom Grant, very quiet people like Chris White, Michael always combative in any way, and Jimmy Farrell's a lawyer combative, and that it was easy to find yourself embroiled in a very hostile debate. But that's the way it went, and that went with the territory, and it had to be done. It had to be part of it.
It must have really added to your frustrations, though. More so than, people, regular fans, don't see behind the curtain kind of thing.
Well, the frustrations went very quickly when they kicked me out.
Well, that was going to be my next question.
And once you were out, there was a big debate within myself as to how to deal with this. And I tried to avoid it all, but the press kept bringing me back into it. And it wasn't frustrations then, but I'll tell you an absolutely true story. As the debate went on in the press and the whole thing, and the fans seemed to respond to me, the board asked for a meeting with me. Kevin Kelly, Chris White, Jack McGinn, Michael Kelly. And they asked what I wanted. Did I want back in the board? And I said to him, I didn't want that. And I said to Michael, I said, Michael, you've done the worst thing any human being can do. You have made an enemy of someone who is prepared to fight to the death and want nothing in return. I said, I want nothing in return, only the betterment of Celtic. I'm now prepared to fight to the death to achieve that.
Amazing times, weren't they, when you look back on it, Brian?
It was. I mean, you look back with some incredulity. You think, did that really happen? And sometimes I stop myself like that story and think, did that really happen? But it did. And it did because I had a witness with me. I took Len Murray, a lawyer, a big Celtic fan, well known to the board, with me. And outside he said to me, that was one of the most profound statements. He said, I could have used that in a courtroom so many times over and didn't think of it.
And something actually did change not long after that, only it wasn't particularly a good change whenever Terry Cassidy arrived as chief executive for the first time.
Yeah, once again, I mean, right, creating these posts and creating these positions, but when you interview people, I would love to know when Cassidy did his interview for them, I would love to have heard what they were saying about him after he left, and what they were saying about some of the other guys. If Cassidy was the guy that they thought was the best man for the job, what the hell were the other ones like?
Well, the first thing Cassidy did was to criticise Rangers for not hiring him.
The guy was just a kind of, raging bull kind of thing, a rogue elephant. He was ridiculous. A forerunner of some of the characters that are hanging about at Ibrox these days, I think. But he obviously, he must have sounded as if he knew what he was talking about. But he was, he came in, started making these noises straight away, came up with all these different ideas, if you recall at the time, Celtic videos, what was it called, Celtic TV or something like that, where he was the star show all the time. He kind of muscled them out the way, and they must have wondered, what the hell have we done here, what have we brought in?
But I find it happy as well to have someone take a kind of face off of them. Again, a wee bit like Dempsey, put this guy, well, he was a different character from Dempsey, but Butch was just right in there, put me in front, I'm Butch Cassidy, I can knock over anyone kind of attitude. And I think the board were quite happy because they weren't getting as much flack then. It was all directed at him. So again, they just went sneaking away.
But even some of the things that Cassidy came out with were very relevant. He came in there and he said, well, Celtic didn't have a business plan. He said that there was nothing there to carry them forward. They had no plan to repay an overdraft. And really what Terry Cassidy was saying at that time, having been at the club for a short period of time, was the club was dying.
Well, obviously, once you get into the club, he's not a silly guy, He looked at it and he obviously just spoke his mind of what he's seen there. And I don't think the board expected that.
He was loving it. He was kind of, I'm the star man here and I'll tell you how they go. But I think, if anything, it just shows the calibre of the other guys, like I said, who had appointed him.
So that later on that year, we actually did have something to cheer about, because in the quarter-final of the Scottish Cup, on St Patrick's Day, we were drawn again against Rangers at Celtic Park. Can you ever forget the St Patrick's Day massacre?
No chance.
No, because I'd left sausage rolls in the oven for all the guys to come back to my flat after. I sort of remembered halfway through the second half that they were still in there.
And yet again, with the game at Celtic Park, even with the steamroller that Rangers were at the time, we expected Celtic to win that day, and it brings it back to the romance of the club too. Here we were, on St Patrick's Day, playing Rangers in the Scottish Cup, and it was just one of those things where I think we for one of the few times throughout the decade, we felt we had a chance to win.
It was a one-off game, basically, for us. And you look back in the time of Celtic's history when we haven't been playing well. We seem to have reduced, like the Coronation Cup, for example. We shouldn't have won that. Celtic were nothing really then. So again, that was a kind of atmosphere we went into it. St Patrick's Day is another wee boost as well, and there was just a kind of lift for some reason, but it was a one-off, a total one-off.
And I think the game gets remembered more for Rangers losing the plot as much as Celtic winning 3-0.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we played them in the league a couple of weeks later. It might even have been a week later. And that was a red card game when we got all these red cards and gave them out of the jungle. Unfortunately, you can't see it on the telly if you ever see the highlights of that, because most of them were given out in the jungle. There was about 6,000 of them or something like that. And I think the second game, it was a 2-0 game in the league game, I think either one of them or two of them get sent off that day. And all the cards came out hilarious. Ian St John was doing the commentary, and he mentioned it in the commentary, remember? All the cards all getting flashed for the crowd.
The early days of displays at Celtic Park.
Big fancy displays there were too, eh?
And there was a lot of movement as well in the jungle that day. Frowned upon, eh?
Don't get me started. Don't get me started. So the game itself, we had the joy of watching Tommy Coyne and Jerry Craney. What happened that day?
First goal, was that the free kick? Darius Dubček was at that game, yeah.
Darius Dubček.
And you're talking about getting a lift. It was, remember, it looked at every time you see it, it looks further out. And it went skating in, and that gave us the lead, and that everybody was buzzing anyway. And that just pumped it up a wee bit more, you know. And I think you know, the players can get a great lift for that kind of atmosphere. And sure enough, they went on, and they actually hammered them that day eventually, and they were well on top. Even that was, you mentioned there them losing the rag, but I think one of the reasons that they lost the plot was because Celtic were all over them and really giving them a doing that day.
I was just disappointed that they ended up 3-0 that day.
Well, I'm sure there was guys coming away for the 7-1 game going that it should have been 8.
Why did we lose a goal?
But to see Hurlock get sent off and Walters sent off and Haley sent off just added to that whole day's entertainment. That'll never be forgotten.
Oh, it was brilliant. Hurlock especially.
Hurlock was tremendous.
Well, apparently he was quite a nice guy. I heard he was staying in the Swallow Hotel when he first moved in. Up at Ibrox, I heard, and he came home, or he came back to his hotel, and there was a do going on, and it was this one of the Celtic clubs way up there, and the story I heard was he came in and he had drinks and what have you, so he was a nice guy.
Looking back at that game as well, it was the first time I ever saw anybody sent off for infringement.
Andrew Waddle was a ref, I remember him, and I thought, yeah, the first one might have been a case evening things up, but three red cards, 3 Rangers red cards in the game. I just wonder what kind of odds Willie Hill would have given you on that.
And a little tidbit of information about that game: that was the last time that Celtic would play a Rangers team managed by Graham Souness.
That's a shame. Well, it gave him something to take away with him. It gave him a nice wee memory.
Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic overall.
Yet another trophyless campaign was endured in season 91-92. Celtic finished third in the league, but Airdrie knocked the Bhoys out of the League Cup. In Europe, Celtic were dumped from the UEFA Cup after a humiliating 5-1 thrashing by Swiss side Mishatau Zamax. The following campaign would prove equally miserable, and Celtic again ended the season empty-handed. Brady would eventually tender his resignation following a league defeat at St Johnstone in October 1993. His reign had been a disaster. Working with relatively limited funds, it had been crucial that Brady's big signings paid off, but all too many were spectacular flops. Republic of Ireland striker Tony Cascarino was a £1.1 million buy from Aston Villa. He would be an unmitigated failure at Celtic. Stuart Slater, a £1.7 million buy from West Ham, was an England under-21 international, with a reputation as an exciting talent, capable of running defences ragged. At Parkhead, however, his form was miserable. Experienced Scotland international Gary Gillespie was signed for just short of £1 million from Liverpool, as the supposed answer to Celtic's defensive frailties. He would prove to be an injury and gaff-prone liability. In defence of Brady, he encouraged his team to play an eye-pleasing passing game, and with McStay and Collins on form, the Hoops were capable of exhilaratingly slick football. But this was scant consolation in the ultimate results-driven business. Brady was replaced in the Parkhead dugout by former Celt Lou McCarey. As a player, McCarey had starred in Hoop sides containing the likes of Hay, McGrain, Dalglish, Connolly and Deans. As a manager, he fielded sides containing the likes of Wayne Biggins and Lee Martin. If the manager could not see how far Celtic had fallen, the supporters certainly could. And the finger of blame for this decline and decay was pointed directly at the Celtic boardroom. For years, the grassroots support had loudly challenged the board's mismanagement of the club. Now, action was to replace words.
It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic overall.
And then, at that time, we saw for the first time a chief executive being nominated in the form of Terry Cassidy. And I remember going, alright, okay, new business model, this may be alright. Terry Cassidy created a few problems for the supporters.
He was very outspoken, and there was part of me liked him at the start because this was a guy that was going to fight our corner. We had basically a board of directors that they never even come out and spoke in public. You never heard any of them talking, really. And then with a guy now that was going to fight Celtic's corner, but it was evident quite quickly that he was more trouble than he was worth. You know, he was very quick at talking, but he didn't say much stuff with much substance, and I don't think he was to be trusted, to be honest with you.
Do you not think some of that was down to the fact that he's moved into this club and he looked around him and thought, my God, what have I done here? This is a disaster. I always thought, in hindsight, when I read back to the Terry Cassidy era, I just thought that here we had a chance, and this was maybe the first person that was starting to publicly speak out against his own board.
Yeah, I think football is pretty unique. That it's these multinational companies, and that's effectively what top football clubs are. And they've got a fan base that blindly follow. And the owners of these football clubs can basically treat you like crap and you come back, and there's not another sort of business out there that if you treat your paying customers like rubbish that they'll keep returning. But football is pretty unique, so in that case you can get people that maybe aren't very good at their job still survive, if you know what I mean.
To me, looking back at Terry Cassidy and trying to rack my brains and think about this, like, no, and it's only when you actually start hearing other people talking about it and things start coming back to you. I think at that time, as we'd said, that the HUD started to become a distrust of the board for likes of myself. And I think I seen Terry Cassidy more as somebody for the board to hide behind, because this was when you were starting to attack the board and that. But this, suddenly they produced this guy, and like he was going to be the mouthpiece for them. And it just seemed to me like it was he was then becoming a barrier between the fans and the board at that time.
Yeah, well, I think that was the full intention of the board, getting him in there so that he could take the flack away from them. Because you had guys like Chris White, I think he was the majority shareholder, and you never even, I don't even know what the guy's voice sounded like. You know, and they would put paid chairman in there. I think Jack McGinn, they put him as a chairman, but I don't even think he'd any shares. You know, so he was just like getting paid a wage, and he was in there to sort of take the flag, and then they get this Terry Cassidy that was come out all guns blazing, just to deflect everything from them and made them sort of not being accountable for their actions. Because as you said earlier on, this is at the time when fans started taking an interest on the runnings of their football club, and we were looking across the city to see what was happening there, and the players they were signing and the championships they were racking up, and obviously we were coveted 9 in a row that it was so precious to us and still is to this day. It was, you're saying to yourself, wait a minute here, this is looking dodgy, and I think just out of sheer desperation the fans got involved.
I have to admit that during that season I wasn't even thinking about Rangers doing 9 in a row. That was a pipe dream. That was never going to happen. At that stage, and maybe it was naivety on my part, there was no way that Celtic were that bad and Rangers were that good that they would go and do 9 in a row. Because even when you look at some of the games we had that year, I mean, we had this St. Patrick's Day massacre that year.
Yep, that was brilliant. And then we beat them twice in a week, 2-0 and 3-0. And yeah, fantastic. But even at then, you still... I don't know, there was just something telling me that each year we were getting progressively worse and it wasn't improving. I was in the feeling that something had to change dramatically for us to get better, and thank the Lord it did eventually, but I think something had to change. If we sort of stumbled along the way we were going, it wasn't looking good.
See, one of the biggest problems we had at that time was the Rangers had money to invest, right? English teams got that big ban for Europe, so suddenly though the English players were looking for somewhere to go and play in European competition, and Rangers were willing to spend money on these guys, give them the wages, and the bottom line was we would just want to spend the money to bring them up.
But that wasn't the model that Celtic adopted. You know, we didn't sign very many English players. You know, you had Paul Elliott, you had Stuart Slater and guys like that, but we didn't follow that model that Rangers did of bringing in the Terry Butchers and the Chris Woods and the Mark Walters and guys like that, the Graham Roberts of this world, you know.
Exactly, but those players were there for the taking at that time because the English teams were banned for Europe. I mean, what were they banned for, 5 years or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was about 5 years. So yep, they sort of exploited that market, and obviously the wages they were paying, when it's looking back now and you look at, obviously they end up dying because of it, but it wasn't a sustainable business model. They went out there and done it, and as a Celtic supporter it was galling,
I know, but let's be honest about things. Back in those days, we could all look back and see what happened to Rangers, you know, and them going bust and all this here kind of stuff. See, when you're a supporter and your other team's winning, you don't care about off-the-field finances, because as long as you win trophies and as long as you put the ball in the back of the net and you have those gloating years over your opposition, no matter what happens, that can't be taken away.
Yeah, and it was living here, you know, going to work every day and hearing them. Like, it was terrible, you know, it was a tough gig. I would always fight my corner, and you would always, because I went to every game, a lot of the current buns, a lot of them didn't go everywhere and stuff like that, so you would always, well, you get the game at the weekend, no, and you would get them back that way, and I think there was a bit of a sick pride as well. You were proud that even though Celtic were crap, you still went every week, you still went everywhere following them, and that's when I started like, going away in Europe and stuff like that as well.
They say that I have on the phone Paul Byrne. How are you today, Paul?
Super stuff, great, all well. Yeah, it was, you know, it was an honour, you know, to be, you know, to actually go to Glasgow Celtic. At the time, I was at Bangor in the north of Ireland, and there was a few clubs in for me at the time. But once Celtic came knocking, there was no other club in my mind where I wanted to go. When I first went there, I was living with Liam Brady, funny enough, because when I came home for the season that I'd been home, I got socialised again with friends and family and stuff like that, and as everybody knows, I suffered with my weight through my playing days, and Liam Brady wanted me to go and live with him.
Obviously the club was in a terrible state at that time. What was it like to join Celtic, and what was the atmosphere in the camp then?
It was like, it was a little bit stale at the time, because the lads that were in the club when I went there, the likes of John Collins, Paul McStay, Charlie Nicholas, Frank McAvenny, Tosh McKinley, Tom Bhoys, were all used to success. I know Rangers at the time were doing their 9 and 10 in a row and stuff like that, so it was a bit, you know, a little bit more pressure to try and stop them from doing that, to break Celtic's record or equal Celtic's record. So we were always under that little bit of pressure, and the fans were always that little bit agitated that if you didn't do well on the game, you know, you went in class over a period of time, you went in class as Celtic class as such. But you know, we had the team and the players there at that particular time. We were a little bit, you know, moved. We had to move out of Parkhead, and the new stadium was getting done. We were playing at Hampden for a year, so we were a little bit unsettled in more ways than one. You know, moving ground, trying to stop Rangers doing 9 in a row, and the pressure was always going to be there. I think it would have been a little bit different for myself if, you know, we had a team winning trophies. You know, we had won a league title, we had won you know, a Coca-Cola Cup or something like that, and I think that probably would have eased the pressure from the Celtic fans on their judgment of me, because I come in from a, you know, as an outsider to come off more, and nobody knew who I was. Going into this, which I thought was a fantastic team, but you know, looking back, it was a team that was going very stale. A lot of players coming towards the end of their careers and stuff like that. So, you know, it was a little bit harder for me at that particular time at Celtic. And as I say, if I was doing an Anthony Stokes today, if I was playing at 21 and Neil Lennon's team today, it wouldn't be so bad, because we're winning league trophies and everybody'd love you.
You mentioned some fantastic names from the past, and I remember, you know, being a fan at that time, and it was probably around 1983, 1984 when the confidence of Celtic winning the championship was starting to wane a little bit. Was that reflective in the players, or was there still a huge determination and ambition and confidence, I suppose, to win the league?
Look, it's like you know, any person that puts on a Celtic jersey, you know, it's. I think it'd be more of a confidence thing, more so than lack of trying. Anybody at Celtic Park put on a Celtic jersey and didn't, you know, give their all. They were soon found out and dropped from the team or moved on. The few players, you know, we were bringing players in the likes of, at the time, no disrespect to Liam McCarthy, playing big as Cam Muggleton, people like that. You know, they went really in the same class as the players that were playing previous, like the Paul McStays, the Peter Grants, the Charlie Nicholas stuff, you know. And then, you know, it was a bit of a bad time for Celtic at the time, and we went bringing in players, and we set them good a class as Celtic class as they did we're used to in the 9-in-a-row teams and stuff like that.
And what was it like to work for Liam Brady? You know, I know you'd been a big fan of Liam sort of in your younger years and stuff, but to come to Celtic and here was this hero of Irish football in charge of Glasgow Celtic. What was it like as a young lad from Dublin coming in to play for Liam?
It was brilliant. Like, you know, at the end of the day, it was a great honour, you know, to be chosen to go to play for Celtic in the first place, and to have a manager have such confidence in you as Liam Brady and what he achieved in his career. I just thought that was a great confidence boost for me, because he had even won the Boy League for Celtic, and then he had you know, the biggest confidence of all is to give me my debut against St. Johnson, and I owe Liam Brady a hell of a lot for that, you know. But it was a long road after that, you know. There was manager after manager. Felix McCann came in, and Liam came in, and Frank, you know, Joe Jordan was there, and Frank Connor took over for a while, then Lou McCarthy came in, then Frank Connor took over again for a while, then Tommy Bones came in. So it was like, you know, you didn't know what changing room to go into, because managers were swapping and changing all the time, like, you know.
And Liam being the man that he was, what was he like whenever you joined the club? Obviously you were talking to him before you signed, and you know, what was he like to work with every day?
Well, to go to work with him, you know, it was great. It was super, because, you know, he was genius, and, you know, when he said something, you listened. Well, I did in particular, because I was a young lad coming into the Celtic team at the time, so, you know, and, you know, to be told that you're going to go and live for him. You know, so I was living with Liam, his wife, his kids, his family. I was eating what they were eating, and well, that's not true, because Liam always had chips. He never gave me any, because I was trying to lose my weight. But there you go. But it was an honour to, you know, to actually have someone like that to have confidence in me. And to be fair, you know, what he done for me in my career, I wouldn't have went out and scored these goals against Rangers. I wouldn't have got to a level of fitness that I was at, to actually compete and play at the level that Celtic were playing at.
And even despite, you know, the lack of success that Celtic had during those years, I think Liam Brady still commands a lot of respect from the fans. I mean, nobody really badmouths Liam Brady even to this day.
I think, me personally think Liam knew exactly what was coming, and so he stepped away. You know, I think he knew that, like, you know, I'm not going to be able to do that in here for the next, you know, 2 years till we get back to parquet. It's a rebuilding process of shipping out some really top players at the time and rebuilding. I don't think Liam wanted that. And I think that's why he actually stepped away after the St. Johnson match.
Mm-hmm.
That was just my opinion, you know, at the time. And then, you know, when the new manager came in, Lou McCarthy came in, you know, he started bringing in players, as I spoke to you about before, that were classed as not as Celtic class, because they played at Stoke in the second and fourth division at the time, Wayne Diggins, people like that. So, you know, I think a lot of people lost a bit of respect for the team at that particular time, because the players that were playing, as you know yourself as a Celtic fan, that passionate. You know, they're really, really passionate. And I think a lot of players just came and went at Celtic at my time that just didn't have the Celtic class.
To play football the Glasgow Celtic way.
Although that year I think we were all cheering on Aberdeen to actually win the league, weren't we?
That's right, yeah. Is that the last game of the season? Somebody, Big Hately, wasn't it? Flattered the Aberdeen goalie.
Theo Snelders.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then we were up in the Garngad where my mother lives, where the motorway passes through it. Come on, the Dons they had painted on the wall there, where by the M8. So yeah, for the one day, yeah, I was an Aberdeen supporter as well.
And miraculously, we actually made it into Europe that season.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, you weren't looking forward to playing, and you're all right. It's good to get a European night and all that, but I mean, you couldn't see that team going very far in Europe against any half-decent opposition. It wasn't something that I was looking forward to with a great deal of relish, other than the chance to go on an away trip.
And it certainly didn't save Billy McNeil's job.
No, sadly. Again, you know, there's guys that are associated with the club that are legends, and he's certainly one of them. But he can't do, and he showed that he could win leagues and cups for Celtic as a manager. But I think by that time, it was impossible to compete with Rangers. God love them, God rest them. And the inevitable, you have to stand or fall by results, and it was just getting worse and worse. It's a shame, real shame how that one finished, but still a legend.
Were you surprised when Liam Brady was announced as Billy McNeil's replacement? Because here was a guy that had never really been connected to Celtic before, getting the managerial chair. This was the first time that anybody that wasn't sort of a Celtic man got the position.
It's like everyone, you give them a chance at first, you need to see what they're going to do. No background in actually management, but what a player.
It's a strange one, but kind of in keeping with the decision that the board at the time were making. What firecrackers they were going to pull out the box next.
Do you think getting rid of McNeil was to pacify the fans as well? Do you think all of that, getting rid of McNeil and bringing Brady in, was to sort of send to the supporters, okay, out with the old and in with something a little bit different?
Oh, Billy's record, I'm afraid, doesn't look good when you look at it in black and white, but when you've got characters on the board, and I don't think they were very strong characters, really. There was no Fergus McCanns on that board. Nobody was going to face down the fans at all. And so, there's always, with them, it was always an element of populism about it.
And even when Brady came in then, it looked at that stage like the board were giving him a few pound to spend too.
I think they do that with every new manager, don't they? You've got to give them some money, and they probably gave him more money than we could actually afford. And let him get on with it. He's got to be somebody. He's got to bring his own players in, his own background staff. You just have to do that.
And I'm going to strike fear into you both now. Tony Cascarino and Gary Gillespie.
I don't remember anybody arguing with that at the time. But either of them actually, Cascarino's a certain type of player, and when he was playing for Ireland at the time, Ireland were playing a certain style of football, and you were hoping that Celtic weren't going to play like that. But Gary Gillespie played for Liverpool, for God's sake. We're buying a guy for Liverpool.
And played well for him as well. He wasn't. He was good or anything. So.
And Cascarino, we got him from Marseille, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, the guy had been earning a living in a pretty strong league, if you ask me, and he'd been scoring goals for them as well. Albeit, were they getting promoted that year or something, Marseille? I can't remember, but I mean, you look at the guy, you look at the guy's history and what have you, and you think, well, they aren't total duds before they've even started. What transpired after that was incredible, but I don't remember too many people thinking that Gary Gillespie in particular. All right, Cascarino was a bit more of a kind of a difference of opinion in that one, but Gary Gillespie, I don't remember too many people thinking that he was a squib before he came.
I remember being delighted when they signed both Tony Cascarino and Gary Gillespie.
Yeah, that's right. Not too much dissension about those two.
You say they came from Marseille and Liverpool. It's not as if they're just coming from the backwaters of no team, they were coming from big teams.
There's two international players as well, who have a lot of caps. But I think with signing any player, you take a chance, don't you? If it works out, it works out. Then obviously you pay the big money for guys where you think the percentage game is that they're going to be good players for you. But you look at those two, you think, what the hell happened there?
And the Brady Revolution didn't get off to a very good start. In Europe, we drew some team from Switzerland called Neuchâtel Xamax. Nobody'd ever heard of them, right?
Yeah. I didn't actually see the away game. I can't even remember if it was on the telly, but there was, regular updates getting bandied about what the score was, and you think it's a joke, but as it goes on, then you get home, you find out it was actually 5, and you think, oh my goodness me, The home game, I think Charlie Nicholas missed a penalty after 5 minutes, which would have made it, I think, 5-2 on aggregate. Everybody would have been up for it. In the end, we only won 1-0. But yeah, I think that's what you get with a kind of new manager, untried at that level, which would, there you go. That's the inexperience there, I think.
Even when I watched the highlights that night on BBC or ITV or whatever, the forward that scored the goals, Hassan, H-S-S-A-N. For that day on, for about the next 3 years, we were always going to be signing him.
That's right,
Was it Egyptian or Moroccan?
That's right.
Egyptian, wasn't it?
I think Celtic by the time you're talking about this, Celtic was still a name in Europe. That's about it. Just a name. Big name, famous club, but for a good few seasons had done nothing really in Europe.
So here you were up on stage, right? And without sounding like you knew as politicians, you knew everything what was going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What were the tactics to put it right? Did you have any, or did you make them up on the fly?
Well, tactics. There was nothing that we could plan half an hour in our heads in advance. To be honest with you, the tactics were to have rallies and anywhere we could go. We went to Ireland. We did a rally on a boat on the 1st of January, coming over from Larne to Stranraer, and here we were. Half the crowd were steaming, and we were up on a boat. And the boat was bobbing about, inside out, upside down, about, I know they come over very early, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And we had a rally there, and we're telling the fans there, that was very boisterous, very energetic. People were trying to take to the stage on the boat, to take the mic out of our hand and address the rally themselves, which was quite good, but we had to try and keep some kind of check on it. So that was wonderful, and we had there was a Celtic Sports Club, one of the first to back us, which was a Kirkshaw Kangaroos Celtic Sports Club, which is out in the Kirkshaw in Coatbridge. And the Celtic Supporters Association and the affiliation of registered Celtic supporters clubs, the two main groups at the time, they didn't back Celtics for Change. That made life very difficult. They didn't back us, and they would say things like, their leaders would say things like, you don't even have a constitution. Well, unfortunately, you're right, because revolutionaries don't really have constitutions, and we don't have time for form filling. It's action. We're trying to get the fans on board. We're trying to say, look, there's people around here with money. There was Fergus McCann who came on the scene at the time. Brian Dempsey had already been on the scene. There was Willie Hockey and Gerard Wisefield. And all these people were Celtic fans, good Celtic fans, who were interested in trying to do something. Now, we weren't backing them particularly at that time, but we were wanting them to back us. We were wanting all these groups who had the money. We didn't have the money. We had, hopefully, the fans on board and the emotion and the driven spirit to try and do something about the club and the perilous state it was in, but we didn't have the money. So we wanted to try and keep everybody on board. And basically that's how it really worked out. We went all over the place, all over the country, leafleting. We had a banner made which said, back the team, sack the board. Now that was very important, because when you start a group like this, some people think you're kind of anti-Celtic. Oh, what's this? We've got enough more players, Rangers we don't like, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's fair enough. We know who the rivals are, but we had problems on our own doorstep. We had to sort them out. Therefore, the banner was important, and the wording of the banner was very important. Back the team, sack the board. Mm-hmm. And we carried that message right through, and it was some ride, I have to tell you.
So you mentioned some of the big investors' names there at the time, and we all remember the stories of who was going to buy in, who was going to do this, that, and the other. Did those guys contact you guys? Or did you get in contact with them? What way did that play out? How did the relationship build with all those individuals you're talking about?
Well, there wasn't a relationship as such. You'd be in nodding terms. If you're on TV and you're on the radio and you're putting forward the group's point, they would know who you were, and you would know who they were. But from memory, I don't think there was ever a meeting arranged between Celtics for Change and any of these actual groups. It was all more sort of underground stuff where we would know somebody that knew somebody, but we wouldn't actually directly approach them. 20 years later, I can't actually think of an arrangement that we ever met any of these groups anywhere. Mm-hmm. But we just knew who everybody was, because they were kind of money guys. We kind of moved in different circles. We drank in pubs, and I'm not saying they didn't, but a lot of their stuff was done, chats, energy, meetings after games over a couple of pints of Guinness, and they did their own thing money-wise in a different way.
It's amazing looking back, in 2013 to the whole Celts for Change thing, because this was really the first example of a fan group mobilising, organising, and actually constructively influencing the future of their club. And it has probably never been surpassed since either. But this was new.
Well, the funny thing is, in the last 20 years, I have thought about that. And I've probably thought about it more now, 20 years later, because I think the group's been recognised more now. The club eventually recognised the group by putting down a sort of 3-foot square sort of slab stone thing outside the Jimmy Johnson statue at the front door. And it said, they put it down there on, I think it was on the 18th of June this year, and it said, the Celtic Football Club would like to acknowledge and recognise the efforts of the Celts for Change group in helping to bring change to Celtic Football Club. Now that for me was everything. I mean, that just said it all. 20 years later, the club have decided to have a look at it and sort of say, well, these guys did make a difference. From our point of view, when the idea started up, you didn't know where you were going. You didn't actually know if it would last a week. You didn't know if the next meeting you had after 3 months would be the last meeting. But there was an energy, there was an enthusiasm, and there was a drive which kept going. There was a belief there. And I think if you have a belief, I think if you look at there's energy from the fans, and I think if you look at the club, or the board were in trouble by not paying their debts, and therefore that gave you a fear, a real fear that somebody else could come in with money and start dismantling a lot of things to do with Celtic. So therefore that fear gave you energy, and I certainly had fear of that happening, and I know the rest of the guys did, and I know that a lot of the support did. And if we could get that message over, then from that fear of that happening, you had energy to try and fix it.
That's a brilliant point, and that was something I was gonna ask of you anyway. You bring up the word fear, because yes, there was a huge fear that we were all going to lose the club. I think we all felt that at the time. Well, whether we realised it at the time or not, I don't know. But what about some of the things that you've actually done to bring the campaign into the public eye? The demonstrations outside the Bank of Scotland. There was the famous call to Michael Kelly during one of the rallies. Were you ever at stages afraid that you might even end up in trouble with the authorities?
Well, how long is a piece of string? You don't really know, because you like to think you do everything within the law, and that's what we were doing. But the particular one with Michael Kelly, I had got hold of his phone number, and he was blanking everything to do with fans. Michael Kelly thought the fans, in my opinion, were just fans there who gave the money to the club, and that's what they were good for. But as you know, fans have got a far more important role to play than just giving money to the club. So I got hold of his phone number, phoned him up from the stage, and at Govan Town Hall, the night of the famous Mary Theresa McGlone walking onto the stage. And I remember afterwards she says, well, do you think you should have done that, son? Do you think you should have done that? And I thought, well, yeah, I thought it was a good idea. And anyway, I phoned him up and I said, hi Michael. So apparently there's about 1,000 people there.
Did you before you said, did you go to everybody, shh?
Yeah, I did. I said, right, going to phone up Michael Kelly, and they're going, phone up Michael Kelly, how do you do that? So we phoned him up, and I put the phone next to the mic. I said, I stated straight away, it wasn't a spoof phone call, I said, hello Michael. I said, it's Mark McGlone here. I said, I'm on stage at Govan Town Hall, there's about 1,000 people here. We'd like to ask you, what your plans are to help the club out of this situation and take Celtic forward. And he said to me, you're on stage, and can people hear this? And I said, yes, they can. And he said, well, I've got no wish to talk to you. He said, have a nice evening, and put the phone down.
As you probably expected him to do.
Well, put it like this. It was mission accomplished, because there was press people there, and we got great press from it the next day. Now, in days prior to the internet, if you could get great press, then that's fantastic. And that was the whole idea of the group. The entire idea of the group, from start to finish, was to make other Celtic fans aware of the troubles that were coming up, the fact that debt couldn't be paid, and the fans eventually got their head round that.
See, one of the things as well, I mean, we keep talking about what Rangers were doing, the players they were signing, but we weren't even finished runner-up in the league. I mean,
we were finishing above us.
We finished third. In the 4 or 5 years we're talking about here, we finished third and fourth.
Yep.
So, I mean, we never even finished runners-up, so that was another big problem. I mean, it was alright saying, I was said earlier, we had players that could probably come in and win the Scottish League if the Scottish League had stayed the same without Rangers revolutionising it, if you know what I mean. But the reality is, we weren't even finishing runners-up to Rangers at that time.
One of the things I would like to find out, Chris, when you've got some of your other guys on here that maybe know a lot more about it than me and Harper, but I wonder what the consensus opinion is that see if Rangers didn't go out and spend and didn't go out and push the boat out in search of this European Cup that they saw it basically cost them their life, but they went on this quest. See if they didn't do it, do you think the old Celtic board would still have been in charge? Do you think the fans would have been alright? Because at the end of the day, if they didn't do that, we might have been chipping in with the odd league and the odd Scottish Cup. You know, I've always wondered if the sort of Celtic revolution under McCann would have happened.
But if you look at the players we were signing in the early 90s, as I said, a lot of them were like for like. You're talking about your John Collins, your Jack Konowskis, your Paul Elliott's, and other players like that. Tommy Coyne came into the team. If Rangers were only signing other Scottish players as well, it would have still been a competitive league with Aberdeen. I mean, Aberdeen had good teams at that time as well, let's not forget. I mean, you're probably right, Jason. It probably wouldn't have happened. It maybe would have happened somewhere down the line, but certainly wouldn't have come ahead how it did.
Yeah.
But I don't see how that would have affected the Bank of Scotland calling in the debt, because irrespective of what was happening to other teams in Scotland, we still had this amassing debt, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That's what forced it to a head. Now, whether we would have had the McCann consortium coming in and taking over, I don't know, or the Weisfield consortium taking over, I don't know the answer to that. But I don't think the situation off the pitch would have changed. In fact, if Celtic had been more successful, it might have even happened sooner to give Rangers a leg up again.
Possibly.
Maybe that's my paranoia kicking in there.
Ring the bell.
No, I think what we all know now, with your Gavin Masterton and people like that were in charge of the purse strings at the banks and stuff like that. I don't think you're far off the truth, Chris.
The one thing's for sure, though, is if you were to ask any Rangers supporter today, would you swap the situation they're in today with financial stability and not having won 9 in a row and all the dominance of that year? There's not one of them would give it up.
You don't think?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think 3 years, 4 years, how long it's going to take them to get back into business. I know they're in absolute shambles right now, but those 10 years that they went through, 10, 15 years that they went through, I'm sure any supporter that went through that will dine on that, out on that forever.
You're possibly right, and the thing is, we'll never get it back either, because we were, I mean, the amount of money that I spent following the length and breadth of the country, every pre-season friendly in England, all the way European trips, everything like that, you just think to yourself, I was cheated in those years, because obviously David Murray was spending money he didn't have, but there you go.
It's when you go over from Ireland and you go into the ground and then come out at half time and you get back to your house and your daddy says, how was the match? I don't know, I walked out. You went to Glasgow and you walked out.
I know. Oh, it was horrendous. And it was just run about the times, my early 20s and things like that. It was always a load of us who went to the games together. And it was great times, you know, great camaraderie. And we used to, when we started singing Always Look on the Bright Side of Life and stuff like that, we were good at taking the piss out ourselves as well. But you know, there's a wee bit of me. See your clubs like Motherwell and Hibs and whatever. These fans, they've not had much success, but they still stick by their team. You know, and it actually gave you a wee taste of what it feels like to be a fan of a provincial club. Because let's face it, we were no better than these teams on the park and going by the league table. I mean, they finished above us frequently. And us we get knocked out of Scottish Cups and things like that, League Cups to Airdrie. I was at Broomfield and we get knocked out in penalties and losing to obviously Wraith Rovers in the cup final, one of the darkest days of any Celtic supporter my age. And you say Neuchâtel Xamax 5-1 away from home in Europe, when previously we would always be playing your Ajaxes, Inter Milans, things like that, Atletico Madrids. But then it was this Swiss team that nobody even heard of, couldn't even pronounce their name. And it was just, it got to the stage that you were like, oh wait a minute here, Motherwell knocking us out cups. You know, it was just like, it was tough times being a Celtic supporter, but I think that's what makes you stronger. And I don't regret going to all those games, and I had some great times following us, even though we were rubbish. Had great camaraderie with the mates and things like that. And it was that's just another part of your Celtic supporting life that I'll always look back in the times fondly, but obviously it's a sickener as well.
I think when you look back as well, I mean, I have no regrets. I went home and away everywhere then. I never went to Europe and that. I was kind of young, I never had the money, but I think maybe it's human nature. You sort of put the bad stuff to the side and nostalgic. You look at the good stuff. But I mean, it's probably, as you say, Jason, a lot of my happiest memories that being a Celtic fan was then. But of course, it's your teenage years and your early 20s and everything, so it's everything that goes round about it, the culture and that. So it was my happiest memories of being a Celtic fan, and just we weren't very successful.
And my youngest brother Joe, as I say, I started taking him. That's when the sort of season ticket culture kind of kicked off, because previous to then very few people had season tickets, you know, when it was all jungle and things like that. You would just queue up and pay your money, and obviously they made the Rangers games all ticket, but if you went to loads of games in your bus, you could always, the bus conveners had the tickets. So the season ticket culture kicked in. I got one for me and my youngest brother Joe, and took him everywhere. And basically always between 1989 and 1995 we didn't win a thing. And that was his first years going everywhere following Celtic. Never won a trophy in 5 years. And to the younger generation these days, that would be a totally alien concept, of following Celtic with them not winning a trophy, and sometimes some years not even qualifying for Europe.
To play football the Glasgow Celtic way.
Obviously, Tom Boyd will need no introduction to Celtic supporters. Tom Boyd, MBE.
Did you get any special instructions when you were playing Rangers, especially regarding how to treat the referee?
No. Generally, managers, just try to tell you to keep ahead and don't get involved. And I know, certainly in the early part of the career, even right through, that you've got to have a certain level of aggression. Certainly, that, I think that's what people talk about playing for the Jelly or something. You've got to have that, but it's got to be controlled. You want to get in and be determined, but we were never given anything. Put the referee under pressure, put him under that. You just obviously the manager's more concerned about your tactics and stuff like that. And then try and mind up. If there was anything said or whatever, they would try and use that to their advantage, or they're belittling you and whatever. They'll try to use anything. But the most important thing, I think, everybody, generally all managers are trying to tell you is to keep the head, to be controlled aggression rather than jumping about like heedless chickens and stuff like that and getting yourself sent off. And obviously for them, if you get yourself sent off, you're bringing the team down a little bit, So to become a football manager, I think you've got to put in a hell of a lot of sacrifices, as well as your private life and stuff like that, all that kind of thing. And at this moment in time, I don't know, I love going to Strang when I speak to him, I said I couldn't handle what, the press were saying, and I hate that kind of criticism. It's not so much for me, but it affects your family and all that kind of thing, just to get it occasionally if you're a bad game as a player and stuff like that, but it's more so the family now, the kids, and I wouldn't want to put them through that kind of torture, so to speak, so I thought I'll leave that alone and just enjoy the time that I've got just now.
There was a fallout between the players and the Celtic View at one stage, and I believe you were involved in sorting all that out. What happened?
Well, it was not so much we tried not to follow the Celtic View because we were fed up with the coverage that we were getting in the press. I think a number of things obviously was bonuses issues and stuff like that, so there's very little that players can do to influence such things, and because you're still wanting to go out onto the football field and play, to your best, because if you want to go out in the football, but no, try that, then you would soon be find out. So the only thing you can influence will stop talking to press and stuff like that, and that's the only kind of thing that you do. And unfortunately, well, we tried to still talk to the Celtic View. That was certainly one, because that was the other avenue to the supporters. The only way that we would speak to them, was through that. But ultimately, it was just about bonuses and stuff like and just trying to that. We didn't want to alienate us from the Celtic support. We didn't want to speak to the papers, and I know that a lot of supporters get it through the mainstream papers. But we're saying, well, still trying to talk to the Celtic View and give them certainly, what they're due, because they are the voice to the supporters, But ultimately in a football club you get a lot of these kind of problems, and as me as captain I could try and deal with it, the mediator or whatever, but hopefully everything all worked out in our time. No, but for me, maybe it's my upbringing from my father. I know building myself up here, but from that point of view, and I certainly tried to sign as many autographs as I could, or them did ask me. I can appreciate what it means for somebody to get a wee bit of paper signed, and maybe I'm lucky enough. I've only got a wee short name, and I can scribble through it very quickly, right enough, somebody that's got a big long Jan Bennett or a Hesslink could take about half an hour to sign one autograph, but I'm not too bad that way. But no, I can certainly appreciate what it means. I can still, as you say, like yourself, when I come to these kind of places, get photographs with other people, and as you're putting your hand in it, just as a wee sort of friendship thing, you can feel them visibly shaking, and it just shows you that, obviously myself and obviously playing for Celtic and what it means and what that means to either that supporter or that kid, or more so I think, the opportunity for kids, because it's certainly a great thing. I know I certainly would have appreciated something like that in my time. I remember meeting, I think it was the Scotland manager, Aaron McLeod. We came to one of our training sessions of the wee football team, and I was like probably what other people would be to me, and sort of annoyed a man, but I certainly know that, I can appreciate where I've came from, and knowing that signing a wee bit of paper and taking time out to do that kind of thing would be very much appreciated.
To play football the Glasgow Celtic way.
And as we limped on again that season, well, it just happened to be Tony Cascarino would score a goal eventually.
A wonder strike. I think he'll be remembered for that, of course, but by me probably more for who was a Hearts player that he laid out at Celtic Park with a left hook.
Aye, that's right.
I can't remember who. I hope it was John Robertson, but it might not have been.
So is that what Tony Cascarino's going to go down for in the annals of history in Celtic supporters' age?
If anything. Yeah.
And the size of his arse.
If anything.
And shots. He'd felt those Celtic shots.
But the goal he scored against Rangers was just comical in itself too, wasn't it?
It was a midweek game, wasn't it? At Ibrox as well.
It was, yes.
It was a winner. I mean, he can sit there. You can, if you ever meet him, if you're ever on holiday and you meet him, and you can slag him if you like, but he'll say to you, well, don't forget I scored the winner in a Celtic v Rangers game at Ibrox, mate.
Actually, it's one of the best football biographies or autobiographies you'll read, is Tony Cascarino's.
I've heard it's good. I haven't read it, but I've heard it's good.
He tells very honest tales, which is quite unusual with some of these books, where they're telling about the glamorous life and all this here kind of stuff. And Tony Cascarino just couldn't cope with playing for Celtic, according to the autobiography.
That's right, and that's a lot of these guys that you mentioned, a lot of signings that you make. It's all very well doing it for these different clubs, but there's a whole different coming to Celtic Park, especially when the club's a bit. There's extra pressure, apart from the usual pressure, having to win every game, and so on. We've got all this kind of stuff going on around you. It must have been hellish.
But still, Liam Brady signed Tony Mowbray and signed Tom Boyd. Well, actually, he traded Cascarino for Tom Boyd. So he was no mug when it came to actually identifying players too.
Tom Boyd did a Celtic career. I think he was great with Celtic, so that was a good one, but that was few and far between.
I think 11 half decent players and putting on a pitch, there's only half of it it's only half of your job as a manager. You have to organise them tactically and tell them what to do and all that. That kind of stuff.
Do you think Liam Brady got a fair crack at the whip?
How do you mean? Do you think he should have got longer? I don't even know if he would have wanted longer, actually, because things were getting worse and worse as it was going on. But
what other jobs did Brady do after Celtic, management-wise?
It's like John Barnes. There wasn't a great queue of people waiting for him when he left Celtic.
Maybe as well that they found out they weren't cut out for it. Great players doesn't make great manager, It doesn't really work because you're a good footballer. And these two guys were just mentioned, Brady and Barnes, fantastic football players. Didn't cut out as managers.
But do you think they got the support that they needed from the club? Do you think they got enough money to spend? Or was it inevitable that they would end up in failure?
I think he got more money than Celtic could afford. I think I don't know if reality was hidden from him. Or maybe they were economical with the truth though when he brought them to the club. But I just don't think they had the wherewithal to back him up to that extent.
And one of the things as well, the two players we're talking about, Gillespie and Cascarino, they were successful at the club. They were two big names.
If Gillespie gets an injury, you can't legislate for that. And Cascarino can't cope with it. There's your two big names there. That was meant to be two of the mainstays of your team. Just couldn't do it.
And the Scottish Cup that year as well turned out to be disaster. Again, when we drew Rangers, and after about 5 minutes of the match being played, Robertson gets sent off for kicking Joe Miller. And we thought, this is it, we're going to knock them out of the cup tonight as well. And do you remember, it was a horrible old night. I think it was at Hampden, wasn't it? And it rained the whole night long.
Very, very few times at Hampden when it's raining you have a good night as a Celtic supporter. It has to be Hampden on, doesn't it?
I don't know, if you're winning you don't notice the rain, right?
Well, the league final when Charlie Nicholas
and Murdo
McLeod scored, was chucking it down.
I'm just chucking one, but I can't remember it.
So that season ended up 91-92, ended up for the third season in a row we ended up trophyless. And surely even with the arrival of Brady and all the changes that went on at the club, the alarm bells must have still been ringing.
Certainly was, because if you don't get the results and win something, that's you don't expect that. Even when you have been through it all, you're like, where did that go wrong there that we don't even win a trophy?
I think prospects were getting worse though. You couldn't see it any better. I think things were deteriorating. I think that was the problem as well.
And that season that followed, the 92-93 season, was quite unique as well, because even when you look at the Celtic shirt, we had no sponsor. So we were limping along, a club with no money, that wasn't winning anything, and you could even see that the commercial aspect or the commercial appeal of the club must have been reducing as well. You thought you were hiring all these people to come in and turn it around from a business point of view, and still the club ended up without a sponsor on the shirt.
Well, there's people there, that was their job, and they obviously weren't doing it. There's something on there that you can't attract a sponsor onto a Celtic shirt. Again, these people that were in charge weren't taking responsibility for it. This is just part of their downfall. That was just another rung of the ladder for them, so it was. So it's quite alarming now when you look back.
And still the sales of the shirt went through the roof.
That's the thing, you know how many Celtic shirts are going to every season you're like that, I don't like that, don't like this. You still see thousands walking about with them on.
We seek him here, we seek him there, never to find.
Maybe in '94 for the Souls for Change and the day the Rhebels won.
Yep, in 1984 I was there on the run up to the whole shebang. A lad called Willie Wilson started an organisation, Save Our Celts, of course. Then it became Celts for Change under, I think, Mark McGlone, Brendan Sweeney maybe. So I went to quite a few of the early meetings. One was in Wellshot Road in Shettleston. Then there was bigger ones in Candleriggs, City Chambers. So I felt part of it. It was a real community spirit. It was a sense of, we are not going to let this happen to our club. And of course we didn't. And then the famous statement, of course, the Rhebels have won. And I think that sort of resonates with me right to this day. And while some people say we may have lost, in general sense in society, a sense of community, etc., I can always look back to that time and think, no, we haven't always lost it.
Oh yes he is, oh yes he is, oh yes he is, oh yes he is.
The day of Rhebels Won, I was actually at school, still was quite young. Remember that time was kind of very depressing and stuff, and you couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But looking back then, because I was at school, I can remember sort of school days, and then remember the next day and stuff for that, people going on about it, and you're young, so you took in what it meant. But looking back now, you actually didn't realise kind of how big it was when it happened. It was, thank God it did happen.
With Buckfast wine, 1967 is the year.
94, I was way outside the park, in fact, standing outside the park. I'd been with Celts for Change for about a year by that stage, right? And never thought it would ever happen. But are we any further forward than we were
so
then?
Has you been working that day and you get a message and you went up at the ground?
It was Friday night, if I remember right. I got a message to come up. Standing outside in the pissing rain, looked up, seen Brennan Sweeney, gave the thumbs up, so we knew the job was done.
County Clare to Singapore or China, America or Canada, you'll find him. He'll never hide his colours, cause these colours they
I was living in Aberdeen at the time. I was home on a week's holiday. Remember the Friday 4th of March takeover was in the arcade in Rutherglen. Somebody had told me it was over, the deal was done, Rhebels had won. Jumped in the nearest bus, first bus I got over to the arcade was in the car park when Brian Dempsey came out, uttered the immortal words, the battle's over, the Rhebels have won. They'll never forget. Totally changed history of the club. It's been onwards and upwards from there on in.
Celtic, yeah, you'll find dedicated followers of Celtic.
You talk to the boys our age groups, and this, as you say, Harper, was the years whenever we all started to go really, really regular. Even coming over from Ireland, we went over to an awful lot of the home games then. But the camaraderie was brilliant. I loved following Celtic during the 90s. I had a really brilliant time because, probably with the exception of the Wraith Rovers match, by the time you're coming back home in the boat, all the boys were there, you had a couple of drinks, bit of a sing-song, and the day out was absolutely brilliant, and it was affordable as well.
Aye, that's it, Chris. When you turned up in your bus, if you're an away game, if it was a ticket game or whatever, you went on and the buses were relatively cheap for obviously being supporters clubs here, you'd be like 4 or 5 quid if you were a member, maybe 3 quid to an away game, and then your ticket for the game, few cans on the bus, and a couple of pints when you go wherever you were going to, and then back home. And it was great. And you say it was affordable. It was the days nowadays, you're like 35 quid tickets and things like that. That was unheard of. So it was great. And as you say, just at the time of your life when you're in the early 20s, carefree, no care in the world. And it was just happy days, and I've got very fond memories following Celtic back then.
See, when you mentioned season tickets, it's funny, I had my first season ticket the year we played at Hampden. Yeah. And I got it for free, because at that time, if you had a pools agency, and you had a certain amount, maybe say it was 40 people a week paying their pound in the pools agency, you got a free season ticket, right? And that had been for all the previous years right up until that, and I got my season ticket at Hampden. And it was funny, it was one of the things Fergus McCann had stopped it, but when he took over, like suddenly you got a half price season ticket if you had so many pools days. It's like McCann never missed a trick for saving a few bob, that's for sure.
He wasn't daft.
Alright, so we'll get on to Mr. McCann in a few minutes. 1981-1982 saw a major development at Celtic when Billy McNeil was replaced as manager by Liam Brady. Do you remember that, and what was your take on it at the time?
First of all, sadness with Big Billy leaving, because just ultimate hero for any Celtic supporter. You know, you grew up watching the old black and white Celtic story, 67, and just everything about Celtic and about Billy McNeill represented, epitomised Celtic. You know, he was the captain, and he was a hero, and he still is to this day to every Celtic supporter. So it was sad when he left, but selfishly, I was actually pretty happy. And Liam Brady, my God, a hero, you know, one of the best players to grace Irish or British shores, you know, one of the best players in world football at the time, an absolute genius. You just said to yourself, how good's this going to be? But it didn't work out as we expected. But I was delighted, you know, getting Liam Brady, because his name reverberated around world football as one of the true geniuses that ever pulled a pair of boots on. So I was over the moon when he came.
I think I could echo just about exact same. Billy McNeill was a massive hero in mine. The centenary year was my favourite year of being a Celtic fan ever, and the decline of that team was quite sad to see. So it was probably the time was right for Billy when he did go. But as you say, Jason, Liam Brady coming in sort of really got everybody excited. He was a star in world football, and suddenly you thought, well, maybe Celtic are looking to do things here, bringing in a man of this calibre, you know.
The very fact that Liam Brady wasn't a Celtic man, did that have any bearing on it? I mean, this was a dramatic shift for Celtic.
I think a huge thing for me at the time was the fact that he was Irish, and even although I was Scottish, I really bought into the sort of Irish thing when I was younger. And for me, us bringing in an Irish manager like that really excited me.
It was just kinda. I didn't really think about it much at the time, Chris, but you're right, it took away from the change that we always had, like ex-players and things like that in charge of the team. But it was just, it was maybe a new dawn, and you just thought to yourself, this is maybe when Celtic can make their mark now. You know, obviously quite quickly we found out we weren't, but it was just a new dawn. It was something new, it was refreshing, and it was, maybe we can lay down a challenge to this mob now, but turned out to be a disaster all round. But he's obviously still a legend in football terms, but somebody that played for at the top level with Arsenal and Juventus, you know, coming to manage Celtic, it was exciting times for me.
It's good when you hear him talk now. He's one of these guys who didn't come to Celtic, as you say, as an ex-Celtic player. I mean, I don't know if he had Celtic leanings as maybe a lot of people in Ireland did, but he certainly speaks very highly of Celtic now. When you hear him, he does the commentary here on RTE and stuff like that, and I mean, he speaks very, very highly of Celtic still. So he's one of these guys that came to Celtic and left a Celtic family.
Yeah. The funny thing about Liam Brady is, when Liam Brady came in, it seemed to me that he was even going to get a few pounds to spend. And I thought, okay, this is a bit of a revolution here, because, you know, he came in and he signed Cascarino and Gary Gillespie and guys like that. And although, again, looking back, you know, they weren't the heroes that we thought they were going to be at the time, but to sign those guys at that stage with a new manager, and it was Liam Brady, I just thought, this is going to be brilliant. We're back, baby.
Yeah, but I think you say to yourself, these guys wouldn't come unless they were promised money. You know, because he's a world-renowned name in football. So surely you're saying to yourself, the only reason he's came here is because Celtic have promised him money. So that was my thinking behind it anyway, Chris. You know, I was very, very hopeful. Big things going to happen. And away playing football. If we could play in the image that Liam Brady created when he played football, I mean, what more could you ask for? Mm-hmm.
The home kit that was used from 1989 was still used up until 1991. This was the winged button collar with a shadow patterning and fine zigzag pattern appearing throughout the green and white hoops. White shorts and white socks complemented the home kit. 1991 seen a new style of home kit introduced and became the first to break up the usual hoops design. This was done by using the shoulders to elongate the arms hoops to give the shirt a new look. White and darker green arrows also featured on the right sleeve, and in 1991 we also seen a new shirt sponsor introduced. The red, white and blue logo of People's Ford was plastered across the chest of the new home kit, much to the aghast of the Celtic support. Red, white and blue. Who in the boardroom signed that one off? This was finished off with plain white socks and white shorts, with a couple of green diagonal zigzag flashes on the left thigh of the shorts. This style of home kit was also used through the 1992-1993 season, with the only change being that we dropped the hideous People's Ford sponsor and went sponsorless for the season, much to the delight of the hoop traditionalists. 1993 to 1994 saw a new style of home shirt released, and this was one of my personal favourite style of kits. I got my first season ticket during this season, and it always invokes great times and memories from having my first ever season book. A shorter winged collar with a green border was used in this strip, which seen the new shirt have less hoops than before, with an excessively large shadowed Umbro logos dominating the hoops. C.R. Smith made a return as the shirt sponsor. White shorts with green flashes down each side, along with white socks with small green Umbro diamond logos wrapping around just below the knee, complemented the home kit.
Over on my breast, and the green and white upon my chest. It's such a joy for us to see when they play football the Celtic way.
So Brady again tried to revamp the team, and the likes of Chris Morris and Derek White left, and Andy Payton and Rudy Vada and Stuart Slater come in. Was this a sign of Brady's last throw at the dice?
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, but I think the three that you've mentioned there is a perfect example of players where the quality, you can actually see the quality diminishing as you go on. Stuart Slater in particular, if this is a guy that he was going to hang his hat on, it became very obvious after 2 or 3 games that the guy was struggling and would struggle at Celtic.
You know, Rudy Vara became a kind of cult figure, but again, he wasn't a great player, really. He was a very average player. Andy Payton banged in a few goals here and there, but again, not a player that should be in the Celtic team.
You know, the quality, you can see the quality diminishing, but also where did they go when they left us?
Stuart Slater was a record signing, we signed for £1.5 million, and everybody was like, oh, flip this, I'll do alright. You know, Andy Payton came in. Andy Payton came in with quite a good reputation at the time too.
But I'm not sure about the Slater one. I think they gave him as much hype as they possibly could, and Brady must have seen something in him. But like I say, I mean, a few games into his Celtic career, you could see that he never had the class of some of his predecessors that we mentioned earlier. Stephen Hackett at Celtic with all the different pressures that they've got.
And again, that was reflected in the performance that season. You know, we lost 1-0 to Aberdeen in the semi-final of the League Cup. We got defeated by Falkirk 2-0 in the Scottish Cup, and we ended up 4th in the league. So if ever the sign was on the wall, that was the year that really done it, wasn't it? Probably the high point of that season, though, was in the UEFA Cup against Cologne.
Yeah.
You know, we had lost the first leg 2-0 away, and then won the return match 3-0 in Glasgow. I remember that night was absolutely bouncing at Celtic Park.
Yeah. I remember that as being the kind of first away trip where we're getting cheap airlines and stuff like that. Prices started coming. Because I think that was the first one I went to in Europe. I didn't go on a supporters bus. Another one-off, right up for it. And it was a great performance that night.
And with absolutely no right to win 3-0. I mean, coming back from Cologne, you thought, here we go again. There's no way this team's going to turn this around. But they were absolutely brilliant in Glasgow, so they were.
Yeah, that's true. Who was it in the next round after that, after the Cologne match?
It was Borussia Dortmund. And we lost 1-0.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next round pulled out another cracking draw for us too, when we got Borussia Dortmund.
I started a wee friendship with them right enough, fans-wise. That was about all we got out there.
But we're saying that, I mean, even though we lost eventually to Dortmund, we're still out of Europe before Halloween.
Yeah. But you thought after the win against Cologne at Celtic Park and the way we played, you thought, here we go. You could turn them maybe a corner, but again, it just didn't happen. Okay, the draw was pretty poor to get another German team, but you just kind of knew that was the end of it. That was the end of the journey.
And it was round about that time that the name Cambuslang wouldn't go away. This is when we first started hearing about the potential of the stadium moving. Even at that time, did you believe Celtic were going to move away from Celtic Park?
Personally, I couldn't believe some of the things that they were putting in the Celtic View. They were just unbelievable. It stretched credulity to the limit. And the so-called artists and what have you that they were putting on the front page, it was fantasy. It was when you saw that on Wednesday and went back to Celtic Park on the Saturday, it was so far removed from reality that it was literally unbelievable.
And the supporters at the time, even though this was being churned out in the Celtic View, what were you rating in not the View at that stage? Were you totally, blowing this idea out of the water, it'll never happen, another, as you say, another fantasy island moment? What were you rating about at that stage?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, I remember around about the time you're talking about, it must have been before the Cologne game, when they started doing some work at the Celtic end. And obviously the thing that would have made it 100 times better, one of the things would be to move it right in, get rid of that track thing round the back of the goal, and move the terrace, and all they did was stick a roof on it. That seemed to be a bit of limit of their imagination, or the funds that were available. It was so old and horrible at times. Even though you loved going into Celtic Park and walking up the steps and seeing the pitch and that, it was just so dated, and there was just no forward thinking from the board, especially at Cambuslang. Everybody kind of knew right away that ain't going to happen. So the word at the time was that, there's mine shafts underneath Celtic Park, so that's why we can't build anything. And then you hear the Cambuslang, they're going to build it in the middle of this toxic swamp somewhere by River Clyde, and you think, what kind of engineering project is that going to be? What is it, like a bloody Suez Canal or something? Do they have the resources or the wherewithal, the imagination? They do, and nobody can believe it.
But even to finance it, when you looked at what they were releasing for the manager, and you were looking at some of the repairs, because let's not say Celtic Park was developed, it was repaired. There was no way that they were going to build this 45,000-seater stadium. Just the investment wasn't there. You just didn't think that the people that were running the club at that stage would ever be able to drum up that investment or have the foresight to get it done.
But we did have some help in the Scottish media. They certainly had a go at the Celtic board. It's amazing how journalism's changed so much. Stories out in the news. They're certainly no friends of the Celtic support, but they were going in for the kill.
I don't know if I agree with you. Surely they would have treated Rangers these days the way they would have treated Celtic back in those days.
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying that at the time they were coming at very good stories about how Celtic were actually talking toxic crap at Cambuslang.
And some of the guys who were, at the time doing some decent reporting, it's guys like Keevins and Jabba were actually right on the ball there with the kind of stuff that they were putting in the papers. Celtic board released a story within 10 minutes. They had made a few phone calls and were able to trash it.